Welcome to the Cassidy Collection. I'm Elliot Mintz. The material that you are about to view and listen to has not been seen or heard before. First up will be my outtakes from a brilliant documentary about David Cassidy, which aired on the A&E channel. Now, that presentation is a 2-hour documentary, and it's available for streaming. My outtakes run approximately 1 hour. I do my best to speak about the David Cassidy I knew and loved. The outtakes are followed by audio excerpts from a 20-hour interview that I taped with David in Hawaii in 1974. We have prepared and are presenting today almost 3 hours of that conversation. Now, the digitalizing and editing of the tapes, which are 45-year-old cassettes, is a very tedious, time-consuming, and expensive endeavor. Depending upon your additional interests, we'll do our very, very best to post more excerpts in the future. But for right now, this will serve as an accurate presentation of the things that David wanted the public to know about him had he been given a forum or platform for his personal expression. Your comments, your subscriptions to this channel are welcome and appreciated.
Elliot Mintz interview, take 1, marker.
So Elliot, let's start by having you tell me your name and give me a little sense of your relationship or connection to David.
I'm Elliot Mintz. I think I met David Cassidy around 45 years ago, maybe a tad longer. It's hard to believe that it was so long ago. He moved into my neighborhood in Laurel Canyon. He had a little house 3 doors from my house. We became pals. We became good pals. I was doing a radio show at the time in Los Angeles, interviewing people. I interviewed him on the radio. Later I interviewed him on television when I was on TV. And through the experiences of talking with him and visiting my neighbor, we became closer and closer. So for the next however many years it was, we were buddies. I briefly represented him doing public relations. I traveled to Europe with him on tour. He was a good and trusted friend, someone who I admired and respected. And I think of him as somebody who just brought so much joy to millions of people.
Can you, I wondered if you could, I wanted to give you a few prompts that are kind of to set up a bit of the story we're going to tell. And for instance, David's story is, like, if you could sort of encapsulate how you see his story in terms of kind of how it unfolded publicly. Could you tell us that? So that would be the first one. David's story is, and just take it from there.
How it unfolded publicly?
Well, really more like how you see his story. Now, his story is complete in a sense. He's lived his life, and so part of what we're doing is sort of trying to give a whole picture of the man. So this isn't going to be the only time we'll do this, but it would be interesting to hear you sort of say David's story is, and then just think out loud about what that story is.
Is the shirt climbing up on me? I can fix my tie. It'd probably be...
His microphone's in there, so I didn't want to do too much damage, but we are looking great right now. So that's a little noisy.
The tie looks great, though. And
Looks
actually, it's
great.
great with the backdrop, the horizontal, and then the polka
That's what I
dots.
thought, but it's having a battle with the lav.
So, if you can, just David's story is, and how would you tell that story?
David Cassidy represents some of the best and most problematic aspects of fame. David Cassidy became a hostage to fame. Over the years, fame took possession of him and owned him. Some might argue that fame killed him. In the process of delivering so much joy to so many millions of people, the energy was all flowing in one direction. It was the crowds that screamed, not David. If you look at video of how he was when he was off the stage, the show ends, he does his last song, obviously there were no encores. He's hustled into trunks of moving cars, laundry wagons, anything to get him out of the building before he is devoured by those who love him the most. You will see an exhausted, empty vessel of a man because he gave it all away. So I think in our recollections of what he did and what he contributed, what may have happened, he didn't hold back enough for his own sustenance. That's how I see the arc of the David Cassidy experience.
When you say that some might say that it killed him, this fame, how do you how would that have happened?
Fame is a fickle lover. She'll kiss you on the shoulder and make you believe that she'll be with you forever. It isn't always that way. Towards the end of his life, he certainly had the name recognition. People remembered who he was. But he couldn't replicate what he had done 10, 15 years earlier. And the little girls who were 13, 14, 15, and 16, they had grown up already, and they had moved on. So David was trying to recreate the Cassidy that he once was, with one exception. While the Cassidy machine continued, the imagery of pop stardom, he was desperately trying to do his own songs, to make his own music, and to be accepted for who he was as an artist. Well, the mistress of fame was always wrestling with this new incarnation that was saying, just listen to me beyond all the imagery. And nobody was, and nobody did. Think of what that had to have done to him.
Tell me tell me your first memory of David, or memories when you see him at that early point there in Laurel Canyon around the time that he becomes famous. So how do you remember him from that period? Do you have an image of the first moment when you saw him?
Is it the mic or is it my tie?
It's,
Because I can retie the ties.
sir. I'm just putting some
Pardon?
additional stick on there. That way it'll just hold it in place.
It's rubbing against the fabric, right?
On a very, very minimal level. How's the tie look for the camera?
Great.
Good?
Looks exactly the way it looked a minute ago.
It's a little unset in the creases.
I can look at it in the mirror and do it in a second.
How's that?
I think it's better if I do it,
Go ahead. I'm okay with that.
unless it's looking exactly the way it did.
I think it looks very good.
Great.
Sound good?
Yes, sir.
So, what's your first memory of him?
When David moved into Laurel Canyon and became my next door neighbor, and we struck up a friendship, he would sometimes come over to my house to visit with me. I rarely went to his because his house had already been a stakeout point for fans. It didn't take long for people to know where he lived. They followed him home from the studio. These were also in the days before you had a large security contingent with you and you could take fake cars back to the house and take, circuitous routes and entrances. They knew he left Screen Gems and they knew he was going to Laurel Canyon. They followed him or they just hung out on top of Kirkwood Drive. So he may have tried to cover the glass that would allow people to look through his house, which he did, but it was more convenient if he came to visit me, and I was a little bit more isolated. There were two experiences with David Cassidy. If he just came over to my house in the evening with a bottle of wine or a bottle of something, and the two of us were hanging out and having a couple of drinks, that was fine. I'll wait for the plane to go over me.
Thank you. Okay.
Sorry, I just wanted to address one thing. I know you hate powder, but
She's gonna do it.
I'm gonna do it anyway. Just a little bit.
There you go. How would you feel if you put your left foot down? Would that still be as comfortable, or are you real good where you're at?
It'd be less comfortable. I'd slip off the acrylic.
Stay comfortable. So, the one kind of experience, he'd come over with a bottle of something.
If we were in my house, hanging out, I'm just talking to my pal. When it's time for him to leave my house, the street lights up with flashbulbs. I hear screaming of fans behind him in the night. He heads back to his house and I see 11 cars going in that direction. I see him pulling the drapes over the glass to presumably try and get some sleep for a 5 a.m. wake-up call. If we were at my house and we were going to stick around late at night, we would call for delivery, some food to be sent up. And that was fine. If we were going to go out to a restaurant, it was going to be an experience. In those days, at the height of Cassidy mania, the business, look, in my lifetime, both as a broadcaster as well as a media consultant, I've spent time with some of the most recognizable faces on planet Earth, And I know a thing or two about celebrity and mass hysteria and the rest of it. Maybe it was the fact that David's fans were so young and so vocal and so excitable that when he appeared before them, it was chaos. Chaos. And going to a restaurant, if the kids weren't there, their parents were there. And we couldn't get through the first 3 minutes without very well-meaning people coming over to the table and saying, look, I know you've been through this before. We were just leaving. We noticed you. Our daughter is such a fan. She has all your posters all over the bedroom. Would you mind signing this napkin?" As he has his spoon close to his mouth to have some soup. He was pretty good about it. He was pretty good about the autographs, and he was pretty good about the attention. But man, every hour of every waking day, it became so burdensome that he was looking for ways of losing the identity of being David Cassidy.
You have seen a lot of this, so how unique and extraordinary was this version?
It was as unique and as extraordinary as I recall it being with anyone. And at the risk of name dropping, I have walked down streets with John Lennon and Michael Jackson and Diana Ross, and I could probably name another dozen. The David Cassidy hysteria that surrounded him dwarfed those experiences. I know that's difficult for people to accept, but that is the way it was.
Tell me about the Partridge Family and David's music. Your feeling about that music and that show. Now, you know all this, but I've been in these interviews setting the stage a little bit because I was a 7-year-old kid when I started watching that show. When you're 7, you're not going to Woodstock or Altamont. You don't know about the Vietnam War, maybe if your parents are really with it. But for the most part, you're not experiencing this incredible era of revolution, cultural ferment. But you can watch the Partridge Family. And so that's how I encountered this show. But I know that people who are 8, 9, 10 years older than me, for them, David Cassidy, they were listening to Hendrix, Van Morrison, Janis Joplin. He was not on their radar, or if he was, their kid sister's music, or worse. So can you talk to me, when you heard the music, I Think I Love You for the first time, maybe on the radio or saw the show, what was your response to it?
Over the years, I have found myself loving my clients and not necessarily being enamored by what they do. No, I was a little old for the Partridge Family, for me to sit back and turn on the television and experience it. So I wasn't a fan of the show or the early music. It just didn't resonate with me, But I understood its entertainment value, the way I understood the entertainment value of the Monkees, the way I understood the entertainment value of the Nelsons, and others, that just appealed to a demographic younger than me. I also spent times with David at his home when he picked up an acoustic guitar and just started singing, just for the heck of it, 2 of us in a room together. And I marveled at his voice and his talents and his ability. He wasn't able to express any of that on the shows. He was there to look a certain way, to move a certain way, to interact with his television family, and, to relate to millions of teenage girls who were watching the show. I didn't watch it very often.
Is it your sense that David, he was aware of this gulf between who he was and what music he loved and what he could do and this public image, correct?
Yes. David was haunted by the duality. He was trapped in a body of pop culture that he did not create. He just stumbled upon it. And a machine was built around him, and there he was. It wasn't as if he was bewildered by it. He got it. He understood it. He understood he was being manipulated and exploited and used by those who would profit off of the popularity. I'll wait for the airplane. There'll be one more flight out of Burbank.
Okay.
to Singapore.
Wow. You've got the flight schedule down.
Got the flight schedule down.
So you were saying,
I'll pick it up at Exploited.
yes.
David fully knew that he was being exploited, packaged, handled by other entities for the purposes of profit. Of course he did. He was complicit in it as well. One of the things that I used to not quarrel with him about, but try to explain to him was, as much as he disliked the persona that became an extension of who he was, he too profited from it. Now, he'll tell you that it was the studio that made all the money. He'll tell you that he was ripped off on all the merchandising. He'll tell you that he got very little cash from the people who paid him or were supposed to pay him. That is true. But that was also a calling card. It was a business card for what he did on weekends. And what he did on weekends, of course, was to go out, fly around the country, and do shows. He got the money for doing the shows. I'm not certain if he got the money for the merchandise that was sold at the shows. I hope he got some of that. But he couldn't have filled those arenas had it not been for the television show. So for our friends who are watching us today, think of reality television. And think of the fact that the people who do reality television shows don't make a lot of money for being on those shows. But by branding themselves and entering your life through the shows, they wind up selling you products, hundreds of millions of dollars worth of products. So one might wonder, David lived in a pre-digital age. One might wonder what it may have been like for David if he took the energy and the power of that very successful television show and that machine that grew up around him and branded himself accordingly with the right websites and the right to give his endorsement to different products. Could he have made a couple of $100 million? Well, there are folks today who are doing that. Justin Timberlake, it could be argued, had a somewhat similar pedigree. He was able to remove himself from his own identity, establish himself as a solo artist, and go on to meteoric heights. To some minor degree, Rick Nelson was able to do that.
Mark Wahlberg.
Mark Wahlberg was able to do that. And one could point to one or two other examples. David was a smart kid, but he was ahead of his times. He was ahead of his times in terms of his wisdom of understanding what was being done to him. But the computer hadn't yet appeared. And he couldn't sell himself, except on weekends.
Describe to me, before we talk about the concert and the tours, because I know you went on the road with him a few times, who was Keith Partridge supposed to be? Who was this character that David was supposed to project to the world?
I think Keith Partridge was kind of an extension of Rick Nelson. He was supposed to be a member of this kind of happy, lovey-dovey family that had weekly adventures together with each other. He was to be homogenized and cleansed. There'd be nothing about him that would be controversial or disturbing. He would always look absolutely charming and engaging and get along well with his mother. The bridge made him popular not only to the young girls who watched the show, but to some degree to their parents who considered him safe. Keep in mind, while the Partridge Family was on the air, Jimi Hendrix was working the other side of the street, that while the perfect, non-controversial Partridge life was unfolding, across the street so was the Woodstock generation and the Vietnam War, which was raging. Well, as a parent making a decision for your 13-year-old child, what to watch, what records to buy, David Cassidy would have appeared a less aggravating experience to visit.
To go that point one further, it has always intrigued me, still intrigues me, that the Manson trial, the trial of the Manson family, begins in the summer of 1970.
69.
That's when the murders occur,
Yeah,
the trial.
Yes.
Just a few months before the Partridge Family appears. So you have the ultimate scary hippie family in which none of the rules apply, in which the children are murderous. And then within months you have on television the story of a family that can do no harm.
Yes.
There is some sense that they may be hippies. Susan Day's character is sort of a Joan Baez type, and Keith's hair is long. So I wonder, I mean, if that's part of that what somehow some canny producers said, well, we're going to counter-program the revolution.
I wish I did that quote.
Go for it.
I can't. It's yours. And I never thought of Susan as an extension of Joan Baez, but perhaps
It's in the show, actually. Danny or Shirley or Keith says something about her being, oh, here comes the Joan Baez, you know. So there's a, but in some ways the long hair and the, you know, she was that piece of the 60s somehow projected through the series.
I could see that. Now that you can tell that my exposure to the show is somewhat limited. But to pick up on your point, 1969 in America was an extraordinarily transitional year. In 1 month, August of 69, you had man landing on the moon, Woodstock, and the Manson murders, the best and worst of America, especially its youth, displayed for all to see. In 1969, I think America had somewhat of a cultural nervous breakdown. 1970 appears, and so does the Partridge Family, where everything is cleansed, it's a fresh palette, and we begin anew. Can an analogy be made to other times in history that we come out of darkness and turn to our culture, to turn to our music, to turn to politicians for something a little bit more bland, something with a little less chaos to discuss around the Thanksgiving or Christmas table? There was nothing controversial about the Partridge Family or David Cassidy. And he had his own views. I mean, when we sat down and we talked, he was as opinionated as anybody else would have been in 69 or 70. And David was listening to Hendrix and the Beatles, and those were his idols. If there were peers, and no Partridge peers come to mind, and no David Cassidy peers or corresponding artists come to my mind immediately, but that wasn't part of David's record collection.
Talk to me about the music and the tours and the concerts. So David, as a touring artist, part of the deal was that he was going to do Keith Partridge. But the fans, the energy of those shows, the fact that it was David without the rest of the family, that was a different experience of him, I feel sure. I never went to one of those concerts, but the footage is striking.
I attended David Cassidy concerts. I was in the hub of it, the equivalent of the mosh pit. And there were moments that I felt I would need body armor to get out of there in one place. You have no idea how deafening, agitated, excited, sexually aroused 20,000 kids can be when he walks out on stage. Now, I don't believe that the person who walked out on stage was Keith Partridge. I think the person who walked on the stage was David Cassidy, who was attempting to fulfill their dreams, but dressed suspiciously in a kind of quasi-Elvis jumpsuit get-up on many occasions. I would be with him in elevators on the way to a concert, leaving the hotel. And we'd be in the elevator with 5 of the bodyguards, waiting to exit through the basement to get into one of the decoy vehicles. And he'd be singing Beatles songs.
David loved the Beatles. He came of age listening to that music. He loved Hendrix, but his roots were actually in Broadway. I wonder if you could talk at all about your sense of Jack Cassidy, who he was and what he meant to David, and what show business example Jack may have represented to David as an artist.
I don't want to mislead anybody. I met Jack Cassidy once, and he was Jack Cassidy. He was urbane and sophisticated and charming and articulate, and I mean, he was the guy that you saw on television. He was the 8x10 glossy. He was the kind of guy who could take a sweater, throw it over his shoulders, tie the 2 sleeves together, and look like he spent 4 hours positioning himself for a GQ cover. And when he smiled and you saw those pearly whites, he had welcomed you into the Cassidy experience. He was old show busy, he was post-vaudevillian, and to some degree, clearly he influenced David, especially later when David would do stage. And you would clearly see the Jack Cassidy moves. And the public persona of Jack Cassidy was one of pure class. He was an erudite gentleman. David had a troubled, some would say tormented, relationship with his father, as is frequently the case with folks who David had unfinished business with his father, stuff that was never completed. Loved his mom, spoke with her with great affection. If he had a drink or two and talked about Jack Cassidy, he would give accolades where accolades were deserved. He recognized his father's uniqueness in terms of show business. But after the 3rd or 4th drink, when he talked about what kind of a father Jack may have been to his son, well, he sounded like a lot of children that you see on Oprah who have issues. I think he learned a lot from his dad about his work. And I think he learned a lot from his dad about what to avoid when it came time for David to raise his own children.
Does it suggest anything to you that David's final recordings are called Songs My Father Taught Me? Does it tell me, what does it summon to mind about how he looked at that relationship? Do you get a sense that there was, maybe he was attempting to reconcile through the music? What does it suggest to you?
Toward the end, when David was doing songs for his father, I try never to try and put myself in the mindset of the people I'm talking about. That doesn't do them justice, and it's highly presumptuous on my part. I think David was trying to come to some kind of reconciliation in some way. It's a distant way to do songs to your father on a record album. It's different than going over to the house, shaking hands, giving him a hug and saying, you know, Pop, not everybody is cut out to be a great dad. And maybe not every kid is cut out to be a great son. I forgive you for any of your indiscretions with respect to the way you raised me. I don't know if that conversation ever took place. My guess is that it didn't.
His father passed away in an untimely fashion in 1976 or thereabouts. So it may be that there wasn't an opportunity, but can you talk about, I don't know to what extent you spoke to David about his father's death after the fact, but your recordings happen sometime around the time his father passed away. So where did things stand around the time his father passed away from your conversations?
I was with David around the time of his father's passing. I attended Jack Cassidy's wake with David. We talked about the...
So, we okay back there? Start with you attended the wake.
I attended Jack Cassidy's wake with David. I listened to the stories that Jack Cassidy's friends would tell about Jack. Highly animated. I don't know if you've ever been to an Irish wake, but it's quite remarkable how they take the somber stuff and put it on a back burner, and it turns more into a party. It was the first wake I had ever attended. Later, David and I would have some conversations about the experience. He, obviously, he lamented the loss. He had lost his father. But in private conversations, I think he lamented the loss of what the two of them could have had as father and son. I was with David at the time of his father's passing. I attended Jack Cassidy's wake with David.
That was a flight that was delayed.
An unscheduled flight to Anchorage. Right. Actually, you know what, Elliot? We covered the wake. We were already on to what David spoke to you about after you'd sort of seen the party side of the wake and people told funny stories. But in private afterwards, there was another conversation.
Yes. And that should do it, I think, in terms of flights.
Okay.
Unless the morally safer Romanian factor kicks in.
Or the tapes come flying in, yes.
Gosh, to have worked with Morley Safer. I had so much respect for him. Obviously, in the days and weeks following Jack Cassidy's passing, David assumed a different posture. And in private conversations, I wasn't hearing a whole lot by way of complaints. It must be hell not to have somehow reconciled with the passing of a parent. Because those expressions, they come too late, they can't be called back, and you'll live with it. And you'll live with some things that you may have said that were not particularly flattering, that may have been resolved with a hug, He didn't talk to me a lot about Jack. I didn't ask a lot of questions because I'd only met the man once. I saw a lot of his dad in David. I only wish they had a little bit more time together.
Were you aware that they had performed Danny Boy together on the Merv Griffin show? Did that ever cross was that something you were aware of?
No, I'm learning that for the first time right now. I'd like to see it on YouTube or something.
It can't be seen, it can only be heard. We're looking for the visual now, but it is an audio and it is very moving. And the more you know about Jack and David, the more moving it is.
Well, Merv kept everything that show taped. And you find the right guy who controls those deep buried archives. He was like Dick Clark. He did not believe in outtakes. He never threw away anything. If the audio exists, the video, well, I'm telling you your job, but I'd love to see it. So there came a time in 1976. David and I had probably spent a couple of years together by then. We shared a lot of experiences with each other. And he trusted me. I trusted him. And one night, probably over a bottle of Chardonnay, I suggested to him that we really try to take his thoughts, his innermost thoughts, and concretize them in the form of a book, an autobiography. He would talk to me. My profession was interviewer. And I would listen. And I would record him talking about anything that he wanted to talk about for as long as he wanted to talk about it. And then later we would hopefully edit the book, put the book out, and that would be your story. He liked the idea and said, let's do it. I think I was 30 years old. David was probably around 25. And we got on a plane and we flew to Maui, Hawaii. And I don't know if we rented a house or if he had a friend who had a house. I don't know if it was his house. But it was a very simple, economical environment and very private, which is what we were looking for. And we spent about 2 weeks, if memory serves, in Hawaii together. We'd stay up late at night, yapping in the kitchen, maybe having something to eat, always having something to drink, go to sleep at 5 or 6 in the morning, wake up at 1 or 2 in the afternoon, have some breakfast, and walk along the beach, the two of us. I had one of those $49 Sony cassette recorders with a strap and 2 lavalier microphones. I took that little Sony tape recorder with me around the world. I had recorded most of my interviews on that machine, on those cassettes. And in my broadcasting career, I interviewed more than 2,000 people. The thing did not disappoint me. And we'd put the 2 lavs on, and we'd start walking, and I would usually just throw out a question and say, just speak to me about it. Sure, he wanted to talk about sex, drugs, rock and roll, the real David Cassidy, the stuff. There were no handlers, there were no publicists. This was just to be it. And we wound up recording, I believe, somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 hours of tape. We lived our lives with the tape recorder running. There was nothing off limits. He never said to me, I don't want to go there, I don't want to answer that question. I tried to be discreet. My intention was never to embarrass or harass him. But it was my intent to get to the real essence of the David Cassidy experience. That was important to me, or else the whole thing would just be hype. So, the sessions ended. We flew back to the mainland.
So that was your objective. What did David expect to get out of this? What was his hope?
David, at that time in his life, was intent upon revelation. This was just after he did the cover of Rolling Stone magazine in a semi-nude Annie Leibovitz shoot, and one of his most riveting interviews to that time.
I want to stop you. Let's talk about that Rolling Stone interview. If that is really backdrop and almost a spark of ignition to this project, what was your perception of? Tell me about your perception of that article. What David had hoped to get from it, what the outcome of that was, what was good about it, what was bad about it. Just walk me through that.
It goes back even a little further. And God bless your editor, because I'm going to take you back further and you might not need half of this. The first issue of Rolling Stone magazine had John Lennon on the cover. David, who was truly a John Lennon fan, read it and was really affected and impacted by it. I don't advertise this a lot, but one of David's real wishes, and one of the few things he asked of me, was would I introduce him to John Lennon? And I said, sure. And John and Yoko were in Los Angeles at the time, and I called them. We were friends. And I said, so my friend David Cassidy, John knew who he was, I don't think Yoko did. It's really important for him to have a conversation about celebrity and fame and how to shake off some of the stuff of your past. And, John got it in an instant. And he said, yeah, bring him around. And I arranged for a private room in an old, wonderful Japanese restaurant on Sunset Boulevard, which is now closed, called the Imperial Gardens. And John and Yoko arrived ahead of us. And I brought David along and introduced him. And the four of us had a very wonderful, animated 2-hour dinner. And David spoke about it publicly in subsequent occasions. And John gave him some really good, solid advice about celebrity and how it moves around and the best way to handle it. And I only wish that conversation was recorded. That was like Carlos Castaneda. That was Don Juan. That was the master speaking to the student. After Lennon Remembers, after that dinner, it was time for David to have his moment with Rolling Stone. And a part of me believes that he was attempting to replicate in some way the shock value of the Lennon interview and the Lennon experience. Just my opinion. And he did it. And when we were taking the walk on the beach in Hawaii, which we will get to, I asked him to describe how that was all created, how it went down, how he felt about the interview, how he reacted to Annie Leibovitz saying, I want to shoot you nude. What it felt like to be shot. He wasn't completely naked, but enough. I felt it was one of his most riveting interviews. And I think it was what he was looking for to get beyond Keith Partridge and the preconceptions. And to some degree, I think it may have had some value. So by the time we got to Hawaii, I think he was on a little bit of that kind of a roll. How much more can I share about my private life, my business life, the whole experience? How much can I exorcise? Because what would be left is the true Cassidy character. That was his motive. He felt that I would be, a suitable person to share the story with. I wasn't going to interrupt him. I wasn't going to take him on any false agenda. I basically was a tape recorder. That's what I was, a discreet tape recorder. We came back with the tapes. I had them transcribed. And I felt some of the stuff was absolutely riveting. I think those tapes contain pure Cassidy. At least the Cassidy that I knew. And I felt he got to express most of what he chose to share with the world on those tapes. When we returned from Hawaii, I had the tapes transcribed in a big book, hundreds of pages, and I took the tapes and placed them in a bank deposit vault where I keep all of my recordings and valuables, etc., never in the house, of course. And there they sat for over 40 years. I never listened to them. I never took them out of the bank vault until one day I got a call from you folks. David had passed. Somehow you learned about the existence of the recordings and felt that it would be worthwhile to share some of it with your viewers. I went to the vault, I collected the tapes, and I just had my fingers crossed that we would put it in a machine, push play, and there'd be something on them, that the tape wouldn't snap, that the sound of the ocean as we're walking would not wash out what we were talking about. They have not been heard by anybody. They have not been publicly presented in any form until now.
Let me ask you one thing about that. Now, there is a book of transcription, so somebody listened and transcribed, presumably. Can you talk about that that book? That's a remarkable book itself, that transcription.
When we came back from Hawaii and I had all the tapes, I knew that the business of listening to 40 hours to try and edit what would be eventually included in the proposed book was going to be a yeoman's task. I retained the services of a professional transcriber who I believe I had used before on a number of assignments. A woman who is very discreet. I made special arrangements for the tapes to get to her and to her only, for her to do the transcription and return the only copy of the transcription to me, not to retain a copy for her, not to make dubs of the tapes. And obviously, after 40 years, she kept her word. And they went into the bank. And they stayed in the bank until tonight.
Tell me, in your view, what's the ultimate value of these tapes? Obviously, for fans of David Cassidy, of whom there are still many, it's going to be an insight into someone they never knew. But I wonder if there's some larger story about fame and celebrity. And one thing has not changed since David's era. Maybe it's worse now or more pronounced now than ever before. But the American fixation on celebrity. the way that people become the focus of intense admiration and obsession. This has continued. So, and David was, he's a phase in that evolution. But I wonder, is there some largest sense of what the tapes tell us that is represented here?
In the 40-odd years that have passed since the recordings, I've made no attempt at merchandising them in any way. And some years ago, when I learned that David was doing his own autobiography, I specifically and deliberately withheld what I had so it would in no way interfere with what David was about to publish. I haven't decided what I want to do with the tapes. It's taken me 42 years. I guess I still have a little bit more time to think about it. This is the first time I've publicly talked about it. And people are always asking me to write a book, and people are always suggesting that I, publish recollections of my time with well-known people, etc. David Cassidy is now before us. I think that the book, the proposed book, if I'm not lazy enough to actually work on it for the year it would probably take to get it right, I think it tells a larger story. Yes, it would certainly tell you almost everything you have ever wanted to know about David Cassidy, up to the point of the tapes. I sometimes go on AOL, to check my emails, and I was following the news about David's decline, his physical, medical decline. And I followed it very, very closely and with great sadness. I really loved David Cassidy. He was a friend of mine. He was more than just a public figure or somebody that I interviewed. So I read these dispatches, and each one was sadder than the one that came before, until it looked like all hope was gone. And then one day, he was gone. And I remember a posting attributed to one of his children that quoted David's last spoken words. I might be paraphrasing, but I believe David said before he left us, quote, "So much wasted time," close quote. That resonated so loudly to me that went right to my heart. I think I did a Facebook post about it. He was talking about himself and his life, but I felt he was talking about all of us. All of us. If there is a homage to be paid, if there is a recollection, if there is a message, for me, it goes beyond the music, beyond my personal recollections, beyond the tapes, beyond the interviews, beyond all of it. That simple Zen parable, that simple directive to each of us. So much wasted time.
What does it mean? How is the time being wasted? I hate to be so literal, but I know. Tell me, what do you think he's getting at? Where is the time wasted?
In David Cassidy's life, he had a dream. He had an aspiration. In an attempt at eventually fulfilling the aspiration which he stated over and over again, to simply be accepted as an artist in his own right. That was it. That was the objective, to entertain people. It could be summed up in a couple of sentences. And he never was able to establish that independent identity. And a part of him believed that all the other stuff would lead up and contribute to that moment in time. From everything he did on television to the Las Vegas experience to all of it. At the end, he was saying to us, for him, he had wasted so much valuable time at pursuing a dream. He didn't provide an alternative. He didn't say what I could have done differently. He didn't say, I should have said no more than I said yes. I should have just walked away from it. The weekend gigs paid me some money, but I paid too high a price to do that. I should have just opted out. Like the great Gatsby, he was a dreamer about what could come. It didn't. He left this earth unfulfilled, disrespected, legally condemned, and worse. There was more nastiness that surrounded his passing than loving recollections. He wasted a lot of time. If I do anything with these tapes, well, I'm 73 now. I better get on with it.
You know, I'll tell you that when we were filming with him and he was recording those last songs, I am certain he was so present. Each of those songs, each one, meant a great deal to him. Wish You Were Here, his dad's signature song. Summertime. Night and Day. He sang I'll Meet You Halfway, one of the Partridge Family's best and biggest songs. And all those songs are transformed by how he sang them.
Yes.
And I had the experience of watching a man trying to catch up all at once and put every last thing that he hadn't done into those songs. And I wonder if that idea makes sense to you.
Makes complete sense to me. When David recorded those last songs, beautifully executed material, revelatory personal material. When he was singing Summertime, it had to have occurred to him how long it took him to get from fall to summer. It had to have occurred to him of how many years he spent doing all that stuff to arrive at this moment of resolution and embrace the great American songbook, to embrace the kind of music that his father must have listened to and played for him when he was a child. What would life have been like if he had began with those songs? If that's where the journey started, as opposed to where the journey abruptly ended. The songs were not his resolution. Those songs are his epilogue.
Thank you.
I guess during the course of my broadcasting career, I interviewed 2,000 people. There are probably only 300 or 400 hours of tapes that preserved those things. Most of them just got lost along the trail, you know. They're all kept in a bank vault, stored as accurately as I'm capable of doing it. Some have been transferred to DVDs, some are still in their raw form. When you contacted me about the Cassidy Collection, which I hadn't listened to in over 40 years, I went to the bank vault and came across these cassettes. The cassettes had not been opened or played in over 40 years. They hadn't been transferred to DVDs or preserved in any way. My fear was that I would be able to bring them home, we'd put them in a playback machine, I'd hit play, and either the tape would snap or there'd be nothing on it or would have deteriorated. I was really surprised how well some of the material held up. But after you use them, they'll be placed back in the bank vault, awaiting their next debut.
So tell me about the circumstances of making the tapes. How did you go about constructing this interview so that you would get the material you wanted?
It was all very informal, and David was in his 20s, so we did it the old-fashioned way. I got my little handheld Sony machine with a strap over my shoulder, got 2 lavalier mics, one for David, one for I, and we walked along the beach in Hawaii and talked. I primarily listened. I was the walking, non-judgmental tape recorder. I just wanted David to finally talk about everything he always wanted to talk about, but for one reason or another couldn't.
Would you mind listening to a section of tape now and just tell me what you think when what the interview summons up for you now?
I'd be curious to listen. Yes, sure.
You haven't listened to these tapes in 4 decades, basically.
That is
that
correct? Yes.
I felt I had an enemy, and I tried, I suppose, at times to outwit I suppose in a way I abused the press as much as they abused me. Only by the mere fact that there's nothing that we haven't touched on that I would like to share with people. There was no question I ever wanted them to ask me, because I never wanted to be asked anyway. You know, I always looked upon interviews and press conferences as chores, and consequently, I felt that most of their questions, probably 99% of them, were focused upon sensationalism and the pop phenomena. So my only regret is that they didn't dwell enough upon the human being, the individual, the artist. But what can I say other than the fact that I wish they had discovered what a neat guy I am? My complaint always was that I was never, from a journalistic point of view, it was never honest. It was never honest journalism.
Here is the opportunity.
Okay, when someone asked me a question about something, I answer them as to the best of my ability, and often that wasn't too good, but it always was distorted. That was my complaint. Not so much the fact that, and I did at one point dwell on the fact that they didn't ask me whether I liked Let It Be or the 12 Days of Christmas, but I mean, those are the kind of questions I wanted to be asked. I wanted to be asked whether I wanted to talk specifically about songs, about songwriting, about artists, about other artists. I wanted to be looked upon as an artist, but that within the context of what I was doing, I suppose, was probably asking too much. When you approach what you're doing as an artist, they're going to approach you and what you're doing, I think, artistically. I feel like, there was no art in chewy, that what I was doing. There was no art in any of that. At least it was not artistically stimulating or satisfaction. At least I could find none. There were moments on the road, but again, it was all a compromise. I don't think there is. That is not art. Compromising is not art, and I.
And you recognize it.
Yes, I do, most definitely. So again, I was most frustrated in what I was doing, first of all. And to compensate for it, I expected people to look at what I was doing and to relieve my frustration and say, well, tell us what's coming from you? What are we going to be discussing tomorrow? I mean, ask me something intelligent, as opposed to how many fan letters I get every week, I allowed myself to be manipulated. Yes, I was manipulated. However, when you make the commitment that I made, that everybody makes when they sign their soul over to a studio. Incidentally, my first salary on the Partridge Family was $600 a week. Yeah, I think the Monkees got $400 a week starting salary. In the year 1969, which I got. I'd done numerous guest shots before that I got $1,500. I think was the most I ever made. But I was an actor, and I was concentrating on doing that, and I wanted to do that pilot was just another job for me to pay the rent and everything else. The fact that it sold, I thought was kind of, I don't know, I thought it was kind of just unique. I thought, well, this will be far out. It'll be on for a couple of weeks, and it'll be off, and it'll pay my rent for the next 6 months. From the initial time that Ruth handed me the script, after I had read for it a couple of times, in the midst of going on other auditions and doing other television shows as an actor, dramatic shows. I'd never done a situation comedy show, let alone a family situation musical comedy show. And there was nothing on the air like it at the time. And I was reading it, and it insulted me. Hey, Mom, can I borrow the keys to the car? I mean, it's rough to make that live, When I read the script, I thought it was saccharine, sweet, cutesy. Boy, but there might be some sort of hook here, The music, even though I really didn't envision it being good, I envisioned it being better than it was. The television show was a family situation comedy. Had really I don't believe it was pretentious at all. I thought it was unoffensive, unpretentious, and mildly amusing at times.
What you might say that I Love Lucy.
Without the success, though. Without the longevity of an I Love Lucy, because there was no Lucy. The problem with doing a situation comedy or any kind of show with kids is they grow up. My Three Sons, Donna Reed, all of those shows. Ozzie and Harriet, exactly. Father knows best. Right. They all grow up. So consequently, there's such dramatic changes in a 13-year-old or a 12-year-old or a 10-year-old, you know. It's not the road experience that, well, the manipulators are always the promoters and agents and so forth and so on. They're in for bucks. They're playing the game. The name of the game is meat, flesh, and as many bucks as they can possibly suck out of anybody, you know, a promoter.
But you too.
Yeah, you're just a pawn, you know? You're just a pawn. You're the one they move over to Abilene on Saturday night, and they move somebody else, Joe Cocker, over to Salt Lake City on Sunday. And, you know, you're just moved around this big board that they play. Sure. I mean, what you're asking me is who the manipulators were. Are you saying I was a manipulator? One allows oneself to be manipulated. And that was, at least in my case, I always felt like it was, I was making money, a lot of money, for something that I really wasn't enjoying. I wasn't hating it either. There were times when I found it mildly amusing, and there were times that I was out on the road and it was fun. Most of the time it was a lot of work and a big drag and frustrating, because I'd have to go out and be that, you know, pop spangled jumpsuit. I would have worn a red jumpsuit instead of a white one. I know now what I didn't know then, and you know, I had no frame of reference at the time, so it was all just experience, and that's really what I look upon it as now. Just an experience I went through as a young lad, and
Well, now with your new frame of reference,
yeah.
would you have done it the same way? What are your...
But what you're asking me is, if it were me today,
Yes.
if I had taken on, of course, I wouldn't have done it. You know, I wouldn't have done it. I'm rich. I don't need to do that. I wouldn't have gone out, and I would not have done a television series. I have no desire to do one ever again. If ever I'm on a television show again, I assume it will be educational, for educational purposes. I did that trip, you know. I hadn't done it at the time, and it was all experience. It was all learning. It was all... even if the learning experience was, this is something I never want to do again, this is a drag, this is something I really do not want to do, I found out that I really did not want to be in show business like I had led myself to believe for 20 years. From the time I could, I think, walk and chew gum.
That's pretty fascinating. That seems to articulate. What does it suggest to you? What does that conversation suggest to you?
I hear his frustration. In listening to the tape, I'm really hearing his voice. That's exactly how he spoke. I hear the inner anger, the sadness, the lament. But in all fairness to David, he was naive. It's not about what he wants the magazine to write about. He's talking about a teen publication like Tiger Beat, talking about his frustration that they are not reporting upon an album that he's working on that has greater substance than the material that they might hear on Partridge Family. And there's a disconnect here.
He couldn't have had that. He couldn't have had that then. He couldn't have that now. And in the last year or so of his life, when he was interviewed, he spent a lot of time lamenting these subjects. So, although he was the subject of so much media coverage, he didn't really understand what drove it. And what drives it is what the constituency, what the readership wants to read about. And they wanted to read about the happily engaged with his family, bubbly Keith Partridge, nondescript, bubblegum star.
Yeah, but it's fascinating. In this recording, one of the things that comes out at me is that David is like a guy who considers himself a swimmer, and everybody wants him to be a marathon runner. So he says, okay, I'll be a marathon runner, but actually I'm a swimmer. But once I run this marathon and I win, then you're going to have to accept me as a swimmer, because that's what I really am. That's, he seems to have felt that he had this huge success. He had gold medal, top of the world success. And yet, it wasn't in the area where he wanted to have success. It's some kind of nightmare of celebrity in that, he considers himself an actor, but he becomes the most famous man in the world as a pop star. And so I think he sort of feels entitled to be heard on the subject of what he really wants to be. But the world doesn't want to see David as he sees himself. It only wants the version of himself he can't stand. That's tragic or I don't know what it is. Maybe tragic's too strong a word, but does that make any sense?
Sorry, do you mind hopping up? I just want to...
Yeah. Do you want me to ask a piece of that question again with this?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't see it necessary.
Okay.
It's an answer with a little bit of your shoulder.
Okay.
It's not tragic. It's naive. If you're the marathon runner who wants to be the swimmer, and you're known as the marathon runner, well, when you win the Olympic gold for swimming, you'll be able to talk about swimming, and people will want to know about your swimming career. You can't do forward thinking. You can't tell people what I really want to be thought of. The public will decide what you really want to be thought of. He was never able to accept the way he was thought of. And as the years went by, and he did become the swimmer, he did record material worthy of listening, and he did sing beautifully. Airplane. And as the years went by, and he was the great swimmer at the end of his life, the indelible image of where he came from tainted that. It was just too difficult to disassociate his pedigree from the quality work he was producing. It sticks to you like flypaper.
Fame caught David completely off guard. The Partridge Family captured a constituency that wanted to look at him and also to listen to him sing. In this excerpt, David talks about doing his first live concert. He was placed on a high wire without preparation or a net. Years of Cassidy mania worldwide would follow, but this, in his own words, is how it began.
Almost like a word association when you think of the beginning of touring, the first couple of tours, the first couple of times out, even the first couple of stadiums that you played. Thoughts, impressions, what you remember, what you recollect, what you saw, what you felt.
Fear, indecision, fear being, I never rehearsed, I never did anything, I never played a club, I went from being an actor and fooling around. I made a record and the first copy sold like 3.5 million. Suddenly I was there and they booked me this date and I was in this 7,500 seat auditorium. It was sold out. It was in Seattle, I think it is.
The first one?
The first one, Seattle.
Right.
3 days before the concert, I didn't even have a group. Right? I mean, I'm sitting here going, now what am I going to do?
You say they set it up. Who set it up?
Well, they meaning the agents, William Morris, those folks, they are always those people who organize and talk and create. They are always the people that are dealing in the flesh, which is the artist. At the time, I was flattering myself, calling myself an artist at the time. However, that is technically the term that I will use.
This was the first time that you sang before probably more than 20 folks.
More than 5.
So, it's now 3 days before you're ready to go on the very first tour.
And I get this hot band together.
Who?
I run into Richard Delvey. Well, they turned me on. Eventually, my record company's freaking. Because I don't know. I mean, I'm still playing in the garage, I'm still 17 years old, jamming with my friends, playing guitar and playing little drums and fooling around. And suddenly they being my record company, said, here's Richard Delvey, get his number, you'll get the group together in 2 days. They rehearsed 2 days. They got this group together for me. The only person in the group I knew was my friend Steve, who I'd been playing with for years.
Ross.
Yeah, guitar player.
Right.
Hot licks and all. And I never rehearsed. I didn't have any idea what I was going to do.
Did you have any...
We flew up to Seattle the week of the SST layoff, when it was in the midst of a depression. There was a hurricane with 120-mile-an-hour winds. I recall going in, the flight was really, really disastrous. I mean, it was...
Turbulent, rough,
it was
crazy.
Ridiculous. People were getting sick on the flight going up there.
At this moment, as you're traveling there, are you anxious? Are you frightened?
Oh,
I'm in shock. All afternoon, I'm pacing, I'm thinking, I'm talking to myself. I haven't even decided what I'm going to do yet. I just know I have all these songs that I've rehearsed with the band one evening. Name some of those songs.
This first song, well, I Think I Love You was the hit, right?
Right.
The first hit.
But
the week I played it, Doesn't Somebody Want to Be Wanted was #1 in the country.
Right.
Which was the second single, which I hated, and I begged them not to release. I did the talking bit in the middle, which was terrible, as like a joke. I was doing like a takeoff on Elvis or something, clowning around. Well, it wasn't even a takeoff. It was just sort of. I mean, I wasn't trying to sound like Elvis at all, but it was like. And now there was this little bit. I did a little recitation. I don't know. I can't even remember. It was so long ago. But
remember some of the other songs on the first date.
Yeah. No, it's so hard. I can't.
We'll get them.
Heartbeat. I'll Meet You Halfway. Singles I can only remember. The ones they released.
The number ones, the number threes, the hits, you know, the gold ones I still have up on the wall somewhere in some closet.
Do you recall the guitar that you were using for the first show?
No, I can't even recall what it was.
You still have it?
Yeah, I'm sure I still have it. If I used it on stage, I still have it.
Do you remember what you were wearing?
Yeah, I do remember what I was wearing because there were thousands of photographs of those. Still pictures of that outfit.
Which we shall find.
It was, it was this creep, sort of Presley-ish white outfit with this dumb sash belt.
The sash that later was copied by Jagger.
Yes. Yes. As a matter of fact, the outfit that Jagger's on the cover of Life magazine in is much like the original outfit.
Knew he do it for you?
No, this other guy was doing it. This friend of a friend who I didn't have any outfit. I was just going to go out and
Who picked
play,
the clothing?
you know. I mean, I wasn't thinking about it. The record company, I think, had mostly to do with it.
You arrived in Seattle. Was there any activity at the airport?
Yeah, it was storming, raining. The hotel was at that waterfront hotel, and I'm trying to recall
We'll get the name.
the name of it. Yeah.
But were there people in the airport? I mean,
No, there was nothing. The place was a depressed area. It was like that week, the SST, they had laid off thousands of people, you know? The night of the concert, the place was sold out a couple of weeks in advance, and 4,700 people showed up. It was disastrous. It was a hurricane. I mean, I can't describe what a hurricane is unless you've been in a hurricane. The wind and the waves were sweeping up against the windows of the hotel, and it was just silly. I mean, it was
in the hotel the first night. Did you sleep alone? Did you have
yes,
your own room?
yes.
And
But they all flew up for it. The record producer, in the entire 3 years that I toured with the record company I was with, Bell Records, the president of the company never came to see me. Ever. I did hundreds of concerts. I did outside of Madison Square Garden. I played around the New York area within 100 miles, probably no less than 15 concerts.
Back to the beginning, back to Seattle, back
Yes.
to the first night.
Farrell was there.
Wes Farrell.
Yes, at the time was the record producer.
Your musicians?
My musicians, a couple of friends, Ruth,
Manager?
my manager, a couple of the agents who I really didn't know, still don't.
William Morris people?
I think I just signed with the Morris agency then, yeah. I came up the way I think that it's the only way to survive as an actor. I came up with a small agency, a good small agency. And
which one?
Corman, Contemporary Corman, and I went with Tom Corman for a while, and then I went to Morris from there. I had about 3 or 4 of them before I came on. The bigger offices, you get lost unless you're really making some sort of noise, you know?
Back to the hotel. You spent the first night in that room.
I spent the first afternoon pacing it. I didn't
preparing
eat.
for that
I didn't
night's
eat.
concert.
Right.
You didn't
Preparing meaning mentally getting myself ready to walk out on stage and say, now what?
For the first time.
Yes. I
All
was
right,
petrified.
I'm curious now about these moments. These are important moments to me.
Yes. They were to me at the time, too.
Did you read anything? Did you watch TV? Did you listen to records? Did you have the radio
No,
on?
I just paced.
Back and forth.
Yeah, paced.
Just nerd.
Tried to get the songs right. Try to remember the words. I could never remember the words. I always blew the lyrics all the time, you know.
What was your statement of confidence in yourself, your ability at the time? Did you feel that you would walk out there and they were going to buy it anyway?
I didn't know. Don't you
No
understand?
idea.
I had no idea what it was about.
I do understand.
Okay. I had no idea what it was about. I had no idea what I was going to physically do when I got out there. I didn't know whether I was going to tap, do jumping jacks, sit and do a comedy routine sketch with them. I had no idea what I was going to do. Don't you understand? I hadn't rehearsed. I hadn't planned.
I got dressed.
I got dressed.
Knock
I went
on the
over to
door.
the hall. Went over to the hall. The first act went on. Kim
Excuse me,
Carnes
on the
and
way to the hall now.
yes, lots of kids outside the hall. First
was
time
your-
I had ever heard real screams. I'd heard it once in a department store that I came and visited as a promo thing that I did.
The TV show.
Yeah. Actually, I had heard them, but I never had been in this kind of a situation where it was playing music and all of that.
Right. Do you recall the kind of a car you drove from the hotel to the...
Limo. They were always black limousines, you know.
And as you pulled up, about how many girls do you think were out?
Outside, maybe 25.
Mainly girls?
Outside,
all
it was
girls?
raining, you understand, and there was a hurricane going on.
I understand.
There were about probably 25 outside. They saw the limousine, the flashes, cubes. Kodak was making all sorts of money. They started to scream, and I realized that I was in the pit.
Amplify on that.
I was in the pit. I was facing the lions. The Christians and the lions were doing it now, you know?
This was the moment.
This
of
was
truth.
thumbs up or thumbs down. The absolute moment of truth.
Ushered in backstage, a group must have been on stage playing at the time.
My group was backing up the two background singers, and I had three background singers at the time. One, Brooks Honeycutt,
Right.
Kim Carnes, Dave Ellingson, who were like a duo, married couple.
Spell the second one, last name.
Ellingson, Ellingson, Carnes, Carnes.
Right.
Honeycutt, you can figure out that.
They were playing, as they would in years following.
Yes.
They would always precede.
Yes,
By
they'd
how long?
warm them up.
How long would their piece be?
There'd be about 45 minutes together. One would do about, they'd do about 20 minutes apiece. Then there'd be like a 20-minute intermission, and then I would come on for an hour.
Okay, you're backstage now. The group is appearing. Your early recollections now, the first backstage in that hall in Seattle. What were you doing then? People must have been around you now.
They
you
are
must
around
be
me,
talking.
patting me on the back, going, "You're gonna knock him out. You're gonna kill him," and all this. I didn't know what I was gonna do.
Did anyone say any word of confidence or anything that's memorable to you now? Anyone who had...
No.
There was not a
I just
soft-
remember Wes Farrell's beaming face, laughing, patting me on the back, and I remember Ruth being there, of course, and a couple of my friends sort of pat me on the back, going, "Yeah."
But
And
no one's...
I remember I just kept looking back at Steve on stage and remembering all the countless hours I'd spent
In the
playing
garage.
guitar, right, in garages and back rooms and all over, just playing, you know, but playing music that these kids hadn't even heard of, you know. I mean, I was listening to early blues breaker albums, Eric Clapton, you know, those kind of records, B.B.
else?
King,
Yeah.
Hendrix. I mean, those kind. I was into all that electric music. As a guitar player, I don't know how I would rate myself, you know. I mean, I don't know how, but I would definitely say I am a rock and roll / blues guitar player, which is totally incongruous to the image. You know, I mean,
Clapton, Hendrix, and you recall some others?
Albert, B.B. King, more B.B. than any, I guess, guitar players, and Clapton. You know, all that teenage Beatle music. You know, I mean, I knew lots of Beatles songs and stuff like that.
But it would be fair to say, as a guitarist, your biggest influences were
Blues.
early blues.
English blues as opposed to like real American black blues, which it was originally derived from. You know, Butterfield Blues Band, I can recall seeing them. I can recall seeing Mike Bloomfield, those kind of guys I used to listen to, and I used to really appreciate their playing.
We're back in Seattle.
We're back in
Intermission.
Seattle, right. Intermission,
Was there an announcer?
yes, of course.
Do you recall?
Ladies and gentlemen.
Was he a disc jockey? A local
Yes, of
disc
course.
jockey? Do you recall his name?
No, of course not.
He was just the local Seattle DJ.
Yeah.
And do you recall what he said?
Well, they were in hysteria before I even got near the stage. And I just remember that just like they were screaming and going crazy and chanting my name. They kept, "We want David," and all of that. And I remember thinking, this is like a joke. Someone set this up just to blow my mind.
You're going to go out there with nothing.
Right.
Just a recording.
Right. There's going to be
Laugh
12
track.
people sitting there laughing, going, "Well, we really
Back to
did
LA,
it to
kid,
you,
yeah.
didn't we?" You know?
Seriously, that was your thought at that time?
Yes, that was my thought. I mean, I can't actually imagine people paying $6.50 to see me. You know? See me sing. I've never even done it.
And then Charlie Tuna or whoever it would be said,
Comes out,
here
and
he
now,
is.
ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. What was the intro then? It changed. I can't really remember because I usually was unconscious by
It'd
that
be
time.
wonderful to know what that first intro was.
I think it was very simply, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, David Cassidy. At that point, I ran up through this back thing. I remember running, my heart was pounding so fast and so hard. You know when your head and your wrists, you can feel it, your pulse, right? And you feel a bit faint. Well, I was running out. I was so short-winded.
Was it a ramp?
Stairs going up the back. I ran out, grabbed the mic, and just started vibrating. And I started singing. The first song I think I sang was called Heartbeat. I couldn't hear the band at all. I could not hear the band at all.
Monitors being drowned
I was
out.
singing about this high because I could not allow my voice to relax. I was so
David
distressed.
raises his voice.
Yes. It's really great to be here, and I really want to thank you. And now we're going to do the next song. And I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I
Was
had
it
no
Scream
composure.
City from the moment that
From
you
the
got
moment
on,
I got out to the
you
moment
got-
I was off,
So
it
whatever you
never
were
stopped.
singing,
It didn't matter. Whatever
it-
I sang, it just made him more crazy.
Is it conceivable to you that anyone could have heard you singing? If they would be on the 8th row?
I don't know. It was just, you know, it was all the stuff that I had heard so much about and had witnessed only in a theater, in a closed-circuit theater of a Beatle concert in 1964 when they were going crazy, and it wasn't even even as crazy as what this was, you know? Like that, I thought that was really intense at the time, and now, looking back on it, that was nothing. I've seen films of Beatles when they came over here. The people were so inhibited then. Now, by 1970, they had really loosened up, you know? And they're just going crackers. You know, they're throwing shit on the stage.
What were they throwing?
Oh, they were throwing necklaces and love beads and photographs and flowers and ID bracelets and jelly beans and everything, you know?
Anything
Bubble
else?
gum,
Bubble gum?
slippers, everything. I mean, it was just...
Underwear? Or hadn't we arrived at
Not
that stage
not
yet?
then, no. That was in the later years.
This was still Juby Jubes.
Yeah, it was still, it was real. I mean, the average age in the audience was about probably 13.
Could you see the audience at all, or were you oblivious?
I got about
to it?
4 rows.
Saw about 4 rows.
And most of them were the record execs.
who don't move.
That's right, they just sit there and sort of, and they were getting sort of beamed by stuff, right? And they're sort of ducking and holding their ears, and I mean, it was really hysterical.
How long do you think you're on stage?
Well, the show had originally planned probably to go an hour. It's probably on for about 50 minutes.
And then it was over. Encore?
No way.
Out.
Out, good night. Into the limousine. I wowed them, they said.
Who said?
They all said. I wowed them.
That was their expression. What else? did
You
they
were
say?
better than the experience. You were better than the band. You were better than, you know. I saw Presley in his youth, and you were, and I thought,
What?
hold on. I thought, no one's going to tell me that someone walking out on stage without an ounce of preparation, walking out there not knowing what in the fuck he was doing, coming on like gangbusters. It was, you know, it was sort of like watching, what's that guy's name? That Barney Fife do his nervous routine? That's what I was like.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you know,
Stuttering and stammering.
well, and I didn't have any patter down at all, you know? I didn't have any those wonderful little things one falls back on.
Yes.
And now, ladies and gentlemen,
Paul Anka shtick.
it never got that corny.
No.
Wes was doing all the Paul Anka shtick.
You're driving back in the limousine now. Are you coming down from it? Or is it are you still oblivious?
I'm high for a week after this. Okay? I go the
You're
next. I go to
feeling
the
good.
next town. The first night
Just
we have
wanna
this
complete-
huge
excuse me,
party.
let me just complete Seattle.
Yeah.
You get back from the limousine
There's a party.
at the hotel.
Yes.
Tell me about the first party.
Well, I mean, of course, I'm the guest of honor. You
Yes.
know. And it was the first time I really felt like, well, this is what it's like to be a rock and roll star. Even though I had by that time 2 #1 records. I had never been out on the road. I never played a small club date. I think the first concert I did, I only did 2 concerts, and then I stopped for about a month and a half, and then it was every weekend.
The party.
But the first 2, I think I made $7,500 a piece. From then on, it never got lower than $10,000 a show.
Back to the party. What was the first party like?
The first party was,
All the people that we've already mentioned were there,
yeah,
plus who?
record people, local promotion people.
Disc jockeys?
Probably the MC was there. It's hard for me to recall, you know? I mean, it's so long ago, and I did so many hundreds of them.
I know it's hard, but I'm just asking to think back, because the first one is...
There were a couple of girls around, secretaries here and there, worked for so-and-so, sort of trying to make time. Yeah, it wasn't a real big outlet, you know. What am I trying to say? It wasn't a... It wasn't that special. It wasn't that terrific.
Not to you, maybe.
It
Just a small buffet, some drinks, some mixing with the company, and then to the plane or to the
Yeah,
hotel.
laughing and sort of carrying on, and I think John Rusk, who was working for the record company, ended up marrying some guy. I don't know. I can't remember. Oh.
Did you fly home that night?
No, I went to Portland the next night. Played Portland. There were 2. It was a weekend. I always played weekends because I worked during the week on the show and I recorded at night.
So the events that we just described were a Friday night.
It was a Friday night, yes.
Okay, Saturday.
No, it was Saturday night. I'm sorry. Friday night I flew. Saturday night. Sunday night I played someplace else. I think the first night was either a Friday night. It was a... Oh,
We'll
we
get
changed
that.
schedules so many times. We can't get that because it's sort of, I think, gone by now, you know?
I'll get it.
Friday night.
The second night you went to Portland.
Yeah. Second night I went to Portland.
Any real differences between night 1 and night 2?
Yeah, they rioted in the second one.
Could you
The
describe
second one
it?
was a matinee, a Sunday matinee, and they rioted. They charged the stage in the middle of a number. They were
These
throwing
people
them
who
off
did
the
not
stage.
have tickets or...
No, they had tickets. It was a smaller auditorium. It's about a 3,000-seat auditorium. And
So these were people who just hysteria and all of that stuff.
yeah, they went nuts. You know, the stage was lower. It was like a theater. It was a large theater. And they...
Describe, from your point of view, what it looked like as they rushed the stage.
Underneath the bull ring, afterwards, they chop up the meat and give it to the peasants. I felt like the bull that had just been had, and they were, you know, grabbing for him and clenching him, and you know, they were like frothing at the mouth. I saw them screaming, hysterical, crying, and I remember feeling a lot of sadness at that moment that I had suddenly witnessed, let alone, you know, motivated them to that, an emotional peak, you know. It was kind of terrifying. I was afraid for them, and I was afraid for myself. Later on, my fear became more that they were going to get hurt, you know, that they were going to get upset, because I realized at that moment, after I had been through it a number of times, that there was really no fear, because there were always guys who had it covered. And
in terms of your personal safety?
Yes, there were a number of times that kids got up on stage and grabbed me and ripped
your
suit.
outfit.
Yeah, and also, you know, I got scratched in the neck and my hair pulled and broken glasses, things like that, you know.
I'll take you back to that in a second. Over the years, over all the hundreds of tours,
yeah,
Ever injured seriously as a result of the...
Seriously, no, just cuts, scratches, ripped clothes and things.
So with all of the mass hysteria, in the long run, there was nothing more than a couple of scratches and bruises?
Physically, yes.
To the fans, in the long run, it was much worse.
Yes. Again, as I said, I was always, you know, when you have 2 or 3 people, you can handle it. When you have 20, it becomes a problem. When you have 20,000, can be a disaster. And it was. I mean, the last one I did, you know, a girl died. There were, I don't know how many people that were treated by the St. John's ambulance, but I mean, it was, you know, like something like 400 or 800, something like that.
We will get to them. We will finish this chapter.
David wanted to share some of his experiences with drugs, primarily psychedelics. They were legal at the time, and he was one of many in his generation that took the trip. They are not legal now. Perhaps he wanted to dispel that clean-cut Keith Partridge image by including these recollections. Or maybe he simply had not been given the opportunity to express himself before. I'm not here to interpret his reasons, so I'll just let David speak for himself.
There were only 2 experiences on peyote.
Tell me the most dramatic.
The first one, the most dramatic, it, like all the other psychedelic experiences I had moments of just sheer ecstasy and ended up again being like a bring down because of what had happened, because of the circumstances.
Where'd you take it?
I took it at... I went to Tuna Canyon with a couple of friends of mine. I threw up in Venice before we got there. We went to Tuna Canyon, we drove there. I came on as the sun came up. I called myself Soaring Eagle. I wore a loincloth. I was out in the middle of like the wilderness for hours, and I brought this beautiful blonde girl with me who I was like sort of dating, but she was working for this company that I knew. And she was beautiful. I mean, she was an absolute forest creature, you know? She was just so lovely. And I really wanted to share that with her. She was on the lam from her boyfriend at the time. Or he was on the lam, I think. From the cops or something. She brought her girlfriend, and I brought 2 friends of mine, both of whom took psilocybin. And we, boy, that's really far out. Mm-hmm. Gotta go out and sit on that.
I like the idea of moving.
Yeah?
I like to walk.
Okay. What was I saying?
Steve, you and Sam, and
Oh, yeah.
they were on psilocybin, you had taken the peyote.
Yeah. Steve had these... was in the Army. In the National Guard, and he had these combat boots. Put them on. And he kept calling them Bircher boots. Steve kept looking down at his feet, not believing they were his. You know those big cop boots?
Yes.
Like, just unbelievable. And to see
Gestapo
them on
City.
yourself. Exactly. That's exactly what it is. Gestapo City. He kept commenting on them. And I, of course, took all my clothes off except for like a little loincloth thing I had specifically for the occasion. And I kept referring to myself as Soaring Eagle. Like, Soaring Eagle sees much. You know what I mean? Soaring Eagle would like to fly. And I kept imagining that this weird bird was following me in the bushes, eyeing me, like running alongside and hiding behind bushes wherever I'd go.
What kind of a weird bird?
Sort of like a turkey.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, only
that kind of weird bird.
Weird bird. I mean, it had a weird face, a weird shape, reddish brown color, kind of like a peahen looking. So we went up there, and I threw up after getting ill in Venice. We went up to this tuna canyon. We hiked 25 minutes back up in the mountains. We left our car out on the road. I had a 1968 Mustang, which I bought, I think, new. And it was parked out on the road. Had my guitar in the back. We had a joint with us also. When we were out there, we had no water. And we were out there for hours, and it was blissful. The sun was out. It was a marvelous day. It was 80 degrees. We were out sitting, chatting, rapping life, talking that people in the city never look at each other. When you get in the city, everything is just so rushed, so pressurized, so hassled, so harassed, that you never stop and look into people's eyes. And it was just really a wonderful... I was there with two of my closest friends, these two lovely girls. I kept referring to her as this beautiful forest creature, your little forest creature, you know? Soaring eagle, running deer, you know, and bircher boots. And we started, you know, just having these wonderful talks about life and philosophies, about, 1,001 things. It just was really stimulating, very incredible. I was really feeling good. I took this walk with this girl, and I could see she was a little upset, you know. She had taken peyote also. She said, I just feel real weird, you know. And I said, because of your boyfriend and being here with me? She said, yeah. If he knew I was here and with you like this and feeling this good with you, it would have been terrible. Rather than press on, I decided to let her be with her girlfriend, and they both went back to the road to try to find some water. On around an hour later, it was now about noon, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. We'd been on for maybe 6 hours. We decided we should smoke a joint. I, at the time, was still getting high occasionally. Probably more than occasionally. And we lit up this just bomber of exceptional marijuana. Something like Elephant or Maui Wowie or something. And we smoked it out there and shared it and just got really, really ripped. I mean, we were really, really stoned on the peyote. I love the peyote because it was such a naturally high feeling. It wasn't chemical like acid or speed or anything was, you know? It was really just a naturally marvelous, kind of inspiring kind of a trip. We got real stoned, and like 2 minutes after we smoked the joint, and our mouths were like camel dung, you know? I mean, it was just... sensitive foot, you know?
What's your name?
Sensitive foot. We hear this helicopter. Looks at me and goes, "Jiggers, it's the cops!" I looked at him and I laughed and I said, "What?" I said, "What, are you kidding?" We had sweaters and jackets lying out on rocks. He said, "Get underneath the leaves, come on!" And he pulls me underneath these bushes, and I'm saying, "What, are you fucking kidding me?" He's saying, "No, man, it's the cops and they're gonna bust us." And I said, "Oh no," I said, "this is ridiculous." So we hide underneath these bushes. We've just smoked this joint. Feel how warm it is in here?
Yeah, it's incredible. Trade wind.
No wind. Let's move on.
Helicopter.
Right. And I'm thinking, this is just like out of M Squad, you know? I mean, I expect Broderick Crawford to come over. And sure enough, comes old Broderick's voice saying, "We are the sheriffs. Go back to your car. We want to talk to you." And Steve, "We are the sheriffs, and we want to talk to you." Wah, 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 wah. He looks at me with these eyes that just looked right through me. Sam looks at me and says, "Well, that's it. We're busted." And I thought, no! I've had this incredible experience, and suddenly here it is again. Again, I'm being bum-tripped. Again, something is bringing me down. And I'm stoned, and I'm confused, and my mouth in my entire life has never been this dry. It's never been that dry since. I hadn't had a glass of water in 12 hours. I'd taken peyote, which dehydrated me. I just smoked a bomber joint, which totally made my mouth feel like a herd had just gone through it. It was just...
What's that, boy?
It's an oasis.
Ah. Oh, it is. Look at that. Oh, that was the place you were telling me about.
It's Kentucky. White fences and horses.
That's right.
Galloping.
That's what it is. The cops crying at you from the helicopter.
Yeah, the cops crying at us. So we get our stuff, and they're right above us.
Helicopter noise.
Helicopter noise, right. For anyone who's transcribing this. It's helicopter noise. And we start going the wrong way. We're lost, right? I mean, we hiked 25 minutes through brush, over mountains, through over hill, over dale, and all of that.
So the helicopter men are telling you to get out of the canyon.
They're saying, "Go back the other way. You're going the wrong way."
What'd you do?
We turned back and doubled back the other way. We started walking down the road, and as we're walking down this long dirt road to the main street, we can just barely see the pavement at the bottom. We hear, "1 Adam 12, this is 6774, 2 Caucasian male, gone," and they're getting the police reports over the sheriff car, so we know it's there waiting for us, right?
You've got to walk into it.
We got to walk into it, and I cannot open my mouth. I can't even open it. I mean, I'm that stoned. It's that dry. I'm trying to muster up the spit to just part my lips. Really, I mean, I'm not exaggerating at all. It was that bad. And he looks at me, he looks at me. Their eyes about as big as dishes. And he looked at me and said, "Can you handle it?" I went, I couldn't say no. So I'm trying to muster up a little saliva in my mouth because I have to answer. And I'm ripped, and I'm walking down, and I see the sheriffs, and we're walking down, and I have this this shit-eating grin on my face. I can't even part my lips, so it's like a shit-eating smile. Sort of like Stan Laurel. Yeah, Stan Laurel. Real dumb, like they've caught you with your hand in the cookie jar.
Or the peyote button jar.
In the peyote button jar, right. And these guys are the classic LA cops. So I see these guys, and one of them is standing with his one foot and his hands on his belt, his one foot up on his bumper, and points his finger and goes, clink, 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 signaling us to come on down and talk with him. So he walks over and he says, he's got his flashlight in his hand, he's going, whap, whap, whap. One guy's a rookie. He's a stone rookie. The other guy has been on the force for a long time, and he's trying to bring him up the right way. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These guys are classics. Says, is that your vehicle? No, he says, whose vehicle is that? And I see the two girls that are there. Obviously, all these thoughts have been running wild, how they knew our names, and we decided that, I had decided that it was the girls had been found or something, and something had happened to them. And they're down there, they're waiting by the car, they're real bum trip because they like pinked on us. But they had to, I mean, it was my car. So it was my big moment. He says, whose vehicle is that? Or this? And they both turned and looked to me, and I felt like, this is your moment, kid, muster it up. I went, mine. You know how you can, mine?
When you just have to kind of...
I just had to part my lips.
Yes.
It was such an effort to do that. And he said, I want your driver's license, registration. You know this is private property, you've been trespassing. You realize that you're illegally parked. You realize we could bust you right on this very spot. Let me take a look at you guys. Come on over here and stand over here. Let me see your lips. I can see you've been smoking marijuana. I can see it on your lips. On your tongue. Your tongues are real dry. I can see that. The guy starts interrogating us. I mean, he went through my car for an hour. He got into everything, under the seats, into everything, under the mats, in the ashtrays, in the trunk, the spare tire, the jack. He looked everywhere, the glove compartments, under, over, around, and through everything, looking for dope, thinking, aha, I'm gonna bust these kids for a joint. He goes into my ashtray, and there are some cigarette ashes and so forth in there, and he calls me over and he says, aha, and we look at each other, and I think, oh no, I couldn't have been carrying anything. I mean, I don't carry anything with me. He says, well, looky here. And I think, oh, no. This can't happen to me. The clink, I can't imagine what that's going to be like. So I'm envisioning him standing there with a gun and his cuffs out. And he finds these vitamin pills that I had with aspirins and quercetin cold capsules in them. And he holds them right up under my face and says, okay, what are these? and he threw my hand away. He said, easy. He said, what's this one? Pushed it out, and I had to point it, careful. He was afraid I was going to try to confiscate it, right? So he's holding it in his hand in my car. I'm sticking my head in my car, in the door of my car, and he's in there, and he's searching, and he's got his belt and his gun, and I'm seeing these bullets in his teeth, and he looks like a bulldog, and I'm just blowing it, and I have to identify, oh, that's a vitamin C, that's a quercetin, this is a vitamin B12. I mean, it's silly, you know?
Yes.
I mean, it's silly. So I identify them all, I go and sit back on the ground again, on the pavement, and this other guy starts saying, you know, we could bust you for life for this. I mean, he starts really laying it on. We know you guys are stoned. We can see it on your teeth. We had this training back in cop school. You know? Oh, and I'm thinking, this can't be happening. I was having this blissful experience. It was all wonderful. And here we are, stuck inside a mobile with the Memphis Blues again. They searched the car for an hour. He calls me again over to the car. He looks in my ashtray and he thinks he's found a seed from a marijuana plant.
The French connection.
I
Los
said,
Tuniscan connection.
I said, that is not a seed. He said, that's a seed. I can bust you if I want to bust you. He said, but I tell you what, because I'm a nice guy, I'm going to let you punks go. I mean, it was real creep. And we started smart-assing off with the guy a little bit because he was just a clown. And I said, yeah, well, I suppose I might get the chair, huh, Louis? and that he freaked, you know? I mean, he just went crazy. He started telling us all the violations that we had piled up against us, what he could bust us for, what the severity of the sentence could be. I couldn't believe it. I mean, I was really distressed. Feeling a little better, however, because I knew he had nothing to bust me on. But just the fact that I had to be there with this guy, he brought me down so bad, the both of them. The older cop sort of shut up and just acted real dumb. The young cop was the one that was doing all the interrogation, the rookie, being brought up the right way. Oh, yeah. So they said, we're taking your names down. If we ever find you up here again, you're going to be arrested immediately. This is privately owned property. You're not allowed to be on these. You're not allowed to park on the street here. You're not allowed to use this property for your own so and so and so and so. And I got, of course, greatly relieved because I figured, well, this is it. They're letting us go. And they said, okay, now get into your car and leave. And I went, oh no, I forgot, I'm driving. It was that realization suddenly that I had to get on in the car and turn the key. This is the fantastic beach.
What?
Lovely, wonderful new beach. This is it.
This is the beach.
Yeah, it's a great beach.
We'll come back to it.
Yeah.
You turn the car key on.
Turned the car key on. And drove somehow or another. Made it back to, come on. Made it back to Venice, where one of these girls lived. I think they both lived down there. And lied out on the beach, bum tripping about the cops all afternoon and the fact that I had to leave that paradise, getting myself together. Came home, I was up for like 24 hours, I couldn't sleep. Drank carob, hot carob. I was living up in the Hollywood Hills at this time. It was real gauche, Billy Bachelor sort of pad. I was desperate at the time that I got it for a place to live because of the fans and everything. Oh. Okay.
I want to just run down some of the other drugs real fast, just as a point of reference.
Yeah.
Sedatives over the years. Valium and Miltown, or were there others?
I don't, I have a prescription for Valium. I never took one until I was about 22. I take them occasionally when I get nervous or hypertense, or when I want to go to sleep occasionally. But I basically try to stay away from it.
Miltown?
Never had one in my life.
What about speed, amphetamines, poppers, bennies?
When I was 16 and 17, I was never a speed freak at all, but on weekends occasionally to go out and make a little time with the ladies, I'd take a couple of Dexamils or something. And I can recall taking speed on a number of occasions. Speed was like what I guess cocaine is nowadays, only it never quite got that popular, but it was basically like, at the time in 1966/67, was the drug to be taking, you know?
Did you take a lot of speed?
No. I took what's a lot? I mean, a lot was getting high.
Daily?
No.
Just on
Once a week, maybe I'd take some. Maybe once every couple of weeks. Maybe I'd go on a 2 or 3 day binge. My body always reacted violently to the amphetamines. I never really was able to handle them well.
What about sleeping pills?
Never.
Never took a sleeping pill?
Oh, I took probably a Seconal once or twice. Excuse me, a Tuinal once or twice. It was never any big. It was never any big.
On the road when you were touring,
Yeah.
what besides grass and hash? Anything?
On the road.
Yeah.
Actually, by the time I got on the road, I was smoking a little bit, but I started drinking a lot more.
No, you're telling me no drugs on the road?
Me?
You?
No.
Never?
Smoking occasionally, but it was only mostly in the beginning.
And that was it?
That was it. On the road. When I was, back in high school, it was smoking hash, smoking grass every day. I took, I suppose, as much drugs as any average, halfway intelligent 16, 17-year-old kid did at the time.
What about
a little more, maybe a little less.
What about cocaine?
I've tried it a couple of times. It doesn't thrill me, you know. It's too hip. It's just too hip. That's really what turns me off most about it. Turns me off most about most things in life. It's like those puka shells that I had like 3 or 4 years ago. I got off the beach myself here in Hawaii. They're now becoming a big fad. They're selling them in New York for $150. You see everybody in the world around here. They go out on the beach at 6 in the morning every day to collect them, and they sell these shells here for $20, $25. And they go take them back to the mainland, and they sell them for $75, $100, $150, depending upon how far east you go. So it's all just a big hype. I see people wearing them all the time. They've become very chic.
Just want us to get back and through with the drug thing before
Yeah.
we go into that analogy. Outside of other prescribed medication, you can't think of any other dope you've taken in your life to get off behind.
Yeah, I took heroin a number of times.
Tell me about that trip.
Well, strangely enough, I never shot heroin. Never stuck a needle in my arm to get off to heroin. I was in my last year of high school, and this friend I knew was getting turned on to it occasionally. And I knew a couple of addicts. And this one guy I knew, who was a very good friend of mine at the time, who later died. And I really, really loved this guy. He was a great, great chum. Really a talent, you know? I mean, he was really a unique person. We used to go out and just do the most bizarre things together. One time, while taking these we used to take poppers along with us, and we'd go buy like a dime bag of heroin a couple of times, and I took these poppers. They were called poppers, amyl nitrate, which we got, and we did a school play. And I remember right before the school play, which he and I, right before we walked into the room where they all were, parents and people and everything, we'd just done it like a nickel bag of heroin apiece. We just snurfed it. And I popped an Amy, and we hit this Amy, and we walked into the room in our costumes.
Yeah, I bet.
And got up on stage, and we were blowing it. I mean, I was just in hysterics. I was bent over. I was knocking things over. I was bumping into people. It was it was a slapstick routine practically.
So you just took heroin through the nose?
Yeah, I never
Like
also.
on top of an anal?
I never took it that much either. I took it maybe 10 times, 15 times, and it was over a long, extended period of time, probably 9 months.
Do you think his death was kind of the end of that trip for you?
It was the end of a lot of drug experiences for me. I think I had pretty well done it, you know.
About when? About what time in your life do you think you pretty much just turned into an occasional social grass smoker?
19. At the age of 20, I'd say.
By the age of 20, all of that was behind you.
Yeah.
Now, do you ever have desires to...
No.
Not at all?
No. The only desire I have now is just to get high from being with folks I really like.
What if somebody
Sounds
handed
so
you a couple
idealistic.
of magic mushrooms these days?
I suppose it would depend upon my frame of mind and my environment, who I was with.
So
I could
it's-
probably be persuaded to take magic mushrooms. I took them once. They were very mild. They were a very mild psychedelic experience.
But you could be persuaded to take all of it or any of it against
No,
this
no. Now, perhaps that would be the only thing that I might even be.
occasional snort of coke,
An occasional snort of coke, perhaps,
an
if I were with
occasional
the right.
Valium if you're a little on edge,
Oh, yeah.
occasional
Sure.
sleeping. So it's
No sleeping pills, no. Valium occasionally. And occasionally I take a hit or two of hash or marijuana, but I don't have any. I don't carry it. I'm not preoccupied with it. It's no longer part of my lifestyle. It's no longer part of my social trip. It's no longer an extension of my social trip.
You really got out of drugs essentially because of the analogy you made earlier about the beads. That when it all became so hip and faddish and in, by then you had gone through it, and it had lost its fascination for you.
Yes.
Fair assessment.
Yeah, that is a fair assessment, I suppose.
Is it a fair assessment also about lots of other things in your life, lots of other experiences that you went through maybe a lot sooner than a lot of other people did, and when they finally caught up to it, it was old hat to you?
I always felt that way. Maybe, again, that's flattering myself a little bit. I don't know. I always was, and still am, into experiencing as much as I can, you know? And not judging the trip, not saying, oh, now I'm taking heroin, oh my gosh. Or now I'm taking LSD, oh my gosh. You know? What would mom and dad say? Well, that's all bullshit, you know?
Were there ever any specific pressures on you to tell when the fame and the popularity came to play down the use of drugs, to make anti-drug?
All the time. All the time.
Who did those come from?
Everybody, you know? I mean...
Organizations?
Sure.
Anti-drug organizations?
I think so. I mean, it was so long ago, you know, I can't really even recall, but all the time magazine people they got wind that I had taken drugs because I was pretty frank about taking them, you know, that I no longer was using them, which I wasn't, but that I had some experiences, and they asked me about, I think I mentioned at one time my friend died, and they just did these bizarre, contrived stories about my friend dying, and his family and his parents and things got so upset, and it really hurt them a lot, and it brought up the pain of the fact that he was dead and that the drugs did it and that I was a part of it, and they didn't want to hear about it any longer, so I stopped talking about it, and I never would discuss it again.
His death, or
His
you're
death.
taking drugs?
His death, and I always played the drug trip down. I mean, always people ask me, you know, they are always curious, inquisitive, you know.
And your response
Could
towards the end
Peter
was...
Pan perhaps have injected the magic needle in his arm, you know? And I never allowed them the pleasure of knowing one way or another. I always sort of like to keep them guessing.
Still do.
Always will. It's part of the fascination that I have being who I am with the microphones being shoved in my face. Also, they don't ever really care either. You know, it's just for sensationalism.
David Cassidy's relationships with women is a complex subject. He had 3 wives, dozens of girlfriends, and more than his fair share of groupies. He also had one elusive vision. David would not pass the contemporary standards with regards to his oftentimes sexist perspectives. He acknowledged that at the time. Most of the experiences were kept under wraps to avoid unwanted publicity. But there was one woman he would occasionally speak to me about that held an extra special place in his heart. He never told me her name and would only refer to her as the places that she lived. I think of her as his rosebud, the goddess at the gate who chose to remain invisible. Most of the time, he called her Culver City.
Talk to me about her. That wonderful story you told me when you were 14 or 15, that first date.
Oh, yeah.
Tell me that.
It was
Just tell it to me, kid.
1963. And I was with my mother and stepfather, who were obviously married at the time. And they took me up to a friend's houses, where we were all going to go to a football game. They had 2 sons and a daughter, and I remember I really got on famously with the sons and daughter. The sons, I hadn't met the daughter yet. And they lived up in the Hollywood Hills, and we drove up there. And I can recall walking down this long banister. The door was open, and there was a basketball outside. They were basketball freaks, so was I. I was really a good player at the time. I was totally indulgent in sports. And I recall picking up the basketball and bouncing it on their porch right before I went in. My parents were inside greeting theirs and everybody. I was sort of bouncing it around, kind of hoping or waiting that one of the guys would come out and dribble around with me a little bit, and I wouldn't have to go in and meet the old folk. But I dribbled in, and I walked into the kitchen, which was right to the left. And there she stood in front of me. And when I say my mouth literally dropped, she was 16 and blonde hair and as pure and as innocent and as lovely. I was speechless. For the first time, I think I was speechless, and I was just, I did, I was flustered. I was scared. And, the old milk pouring trick. You go for a glass of milk and you try to keep yourself busy. I'll have a glass of milk. And you sit there and you pour the milk.
Tell me just a little bit more about what you look like, the first image, the way you see.
Okay, as I
Remember
see her standing there, I see her. She has blonde hair, no makeup. I was leaning against the icebox, and she didn't really notice me as I was standing there. It took a few moments. She was getting herself, I think, some milk. This like center counter thing. And she had a white blouse on. And she had enormous breasts. And she had a body of a woman. And she turned and looked at me. And I felt like she was looking like right through me. It was like someone who just connected with me from the moment I saw her. And like I stared at her for a minute or a couple of seconds. It might have been an instant. But when our eyes met, there definitely was something there. At the time I was 13, she was 16. I was a child, probably, in her eyes. I later found out, as I asked her if she ever recalled looking at me, she said yes. I said, "What did you think of me?" And the highest compliment that anybody has ever paid me, probably in my entire life. Now that I think of it, it's probably the only one I can think of, but she said, "I thought you were the most beautiful man I'd ever seen."
Well, you were 13.
I was 13. And for me to be called a man at 13, that was it, So there she stood. She had jeans, Levi's on, and old sneakers, as I recall. And she was so beautiful. And we all went to the football game. Except her, I think. And I was really hoping that she would come. And I heard my stepfather and mother on the way to the game. We took 2 separate cars, saying, isn't Culver City, isn't she going to be a knockout? And my mother turned to him and said, something to the effect of, I think it's already happened, Yeah. And she was. I also recall a year later, which I don't think I saw her. I saw her brothers a couple of times who I became friends with, and I played basketball with at the time. I used to go out on the weekends with a friend of mine, and I played with all these high school guys. They were she was 3 years older. They were 4 and 5 years older than I was. I was 13, they were 18, 19, 17 maybe, 17, 18. And they were really intelligent, Their stepfather was really strict with them and forced them to read 3 books a week and had them really disciplined. And their mother had remarried. I always remember them as being the most interesting. The three of them were the most interesting. I use the word kids, but peers. You know, that, and I suppose they were my peers, even though they were a bit older than I was, that I can recall from those times, from those days, or certainly one of the most. And from that moment I saw her in the kitchen, as I stood there and I poured the milk all over me, I always saw her as something more special, more more pure, higher than any other woman that I ever had come in contact with. I don't know why either, it just happened.
When was the first time you actually touched her? Do you remember that?
Yeah. We were 14, it was a year later.
You were 14.
I was 14, she was 17. A year later, she looked more beautiful than she did the year before. I can't tell you the feeling of desire, wanting to walk up to her and just hug her. I mean, that would have been the biggest, I would have had an orgasm doing that, probably. Just walking up to her and having her hold me, hug her. I remember we walked down, they were up in the Hollywood Hills, and we walked down the street. It was probably the year later after the football game, because we made it like an annual thing for 2 or 3 years. I think 3 years, 4 years maybe even. But I was smoking at the time.
Cigarette?
Yeah. I think I was 13 or 14. Anyway. I was smoking cigarettes. And I was a bit ashamed and embarrassed because I knew that people looked at me as, I mean, when I was 14, I looked 10. 11. I looked 11.
Were you self-conscious about that?
Yeah. Yeah. I wouldn't smoke out on the streets.
Because people would think that young punk creep kids.
Yeah, they'd call me young punk, young creep kids. I mean, I had old people come up to me and lecture me on the streets.
Get back to her.
I overheard her saying to her brother, "Let's go out and have a smoke." And I thought, now's my chance. So I went, "Are you guys gonna go out and have one?" And I carried a pack of Marlboro in my pocket, my inside pocket.
Yeah.
And they went, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, I've got some. I got a couple." Yeah. It's the big time. So she and her older brother, the one right older than her, and I walked down the street, shared a cigarette. And I remember feeling at that moment like a part of it, like I wasn't this younger kid who was coming up to visit and play basketball with. Suddenly she looked upon me as someone who she could see.
Who she could love?
No, my imagination didn't ever allow me to take it that far. Although I suppose I probably fantasized a little bit about it. That feeling was the first time, I really felt like, even though I knew she had looked at me, she never saw me. I knew at that moment she saw me, and I wasn't just a little kid who was sort of tagging along with Mama and Dada.
Did you love her?
Then?
Did implies yesterday.
Yes, I loved her.
Do you love her?
I believe that everybody who honestly loves another person, regardless what that other person may do to suffocate that, still, somewhere, somehow, above, beyond, below, beside, through it all, still has a love for that person. The answer to that question is yes, I will always have love for her.
Do you love her?
I answered your question.
No, you didn't.
I love her, yes, I told you. When I'd taken her out a few times, and I really had connected with her, and I really was digging her. This was in 1971. I was 21 at the time. And we went back to her house. She lived in this little sort of dumpy place, and probably $150 a month in Burbank, in this creep neighborhood. It was just like the Twilight Zone, like 1958. Guys running by and, cars out of the 21st century,
Mustang City.
Yeah.
Mag wheels,
Yeah.
4 on the floor.
Yeah, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Just in the midst of this lived this gem.
Princess.
Yes.
Queen.
Yes.
Tell me
And I would visit her every day after work. I'd go over to her house, and she'd be there, and she would meet me at the door. It's all those things.
What did she wear?
Usually flowing, like things that just she pulled over her head. Usually just like, I forget what they're called, not muumuus, but just one-piece little things, flowing robes, kind of. Short ones a lot of the time.
90s.
Because I like to see her legs, and I like to touch her. But, what was I saying? The first time I made love to her, we'd been out a ways, and we came back to her house. I was lying on her couch. She got me some tea, and she came in, and she kissed me for about 30 seconds. And she told me that she really wanted to make love to me. And I was flabbergasted. It blew my mind. I was like lured. I just didn't know how to do it. I just felt like immediately a student. I felt like, well, I've been here 1,000 times, but this is like it. And she took me into her bedroom, which was merely a bed on the floor by a window which she always kept open, on wooden floors. And I made love to her practically all night long. And she woke me up for work. I fell asleep, and she woke me up for work. And I just recall waking up to her and desperately wanting her to stay with me. You know that feeling after you just meet someone and you can't wait for her to leave? Like you peer across the pillow and there she is, you are drunk, and there is the running eye makeup all over, and the pillow is stained, and the eye makeup and the hair and the hairspray, and suddenly you think, why in the world, who was she? But I woke up and it was the purest, most beautiful experience. I couldn't wait to just hold her. I couldn't wait to just touch her. I couldn't wait to just look at her, Just watched her sleep. I talked about it all with her. I talked about my father. I talked about my mother. I just remember it being incredible. Just remember that feeling of waking up in the morning. I just remember that feeling of sheer exhaustion after I made love to her all night. I remember all of it. I remember kissing her breast, I remember kissing her ear, I remember, touching her face. Oh, it was all there. It was all there. It was just high. It was just lovely. It was beautiful. It was magical. It was a hot summer night, and the air was real still in her room, and I could just remember she always slept by an open window. Just blissful pleasure in every sound, And the first time I made love with her was 1971, boy.
5 years.
4 years.
4
3 years.
4 years.
4 years.
What was it? I mean, what was it about this one that so knocked you out?
It's her. She was... How can I describe who she was? She was as high, as incredible, as loving, as sincere, as sensitive, as intelligent, as beautiful as a woman I've ever met. That's why. An example. She called me up. I called her up while we were together later on, after we had shared lots of days, nights, moments together. I was really paranoid at the time. I was at the peak of my career.
This is before
the peak of my intensity as a teeny bop fave rave. Before the garden, yeah. And she said, she used to go to the grocery store all the time with the kids and take them. She had an old Plymouth, 58 Plymouth. I was making $20,000 a day, probably, God knows what. And she was living in the stone. And she went to the grocery store and she said, I saw you in the front of this magazine. She said, Didn't really look like you, though. So I just saw it for a minute. I said, oh yeah. It was Life magazine.
Cover.
Yeah. It was the week I was on the cover. I don't know what year. 72 sometime. November, I think, 72, 71, 72. I don't know, but she didn't even remember what it was. It never phased or it never meant anything to her.
She just saw the picture.
She never even, yeah, she didn't even, she was totally oblivious to David Cassidy as the pop phenomenon. You know, I mean, it was just her and me alone all the time. Hardly ever went out. Never mentioned her name. She was never in a magazine with me.
What'd you do all the time?
Made love to her.
What else?
Talked to her. Played with her.
Kids.
Yeah. Took pictures of her and her kids. Was into photography then. Also used to play songs for her all the time.
Yours?
Some of mine. Some of others.
What else did you do with her all the time? You ever go out, travel around?
Dinners. Occasionally I'd take her out to dinner.
She liked that? She wanted to go out?
No. She liked cooking for me a lot. After work I used to come over. She used to cook for me all the time. She liked that.
What kind of food?
Family food. Growing up on it food. We used to sit at the table with a kid and they used to throw macaroni all over me. And it got me so high I didn't care. I used to go in and she had a son and daughter. They're both, one was 4 and the other was 2. And I really dug them both. A whole lot.
You watch TV together?
Yeah. Read a little bit. Mostly while she was making dinner, I would sing to her. She played guitar.
She did?
Yeah. She played guitar, folk guitar. I played rock and roll.
What songs?
Me?
Yeah. Yours?
Yeah. I wrote the first song I ever wrote about her.
Which one?
Waking Up. Was the first day first night I went out with her, and I guess I fell in love with her that night. Was the night my dog died.
Which
It
dog?
was my first dog. It was called, his name was Sam, but I called him Ricky. Ricky Rascal.
The night that your dog died was the first night you made love with her?
The first night I fell in love with her. I don't think I made love to her that night. The first night I went out with her and I fell in love with her, I got so high, she walked me out to the car in front of her house. She had been divorced or separated from her husband for a good 6 months. Her husband lived a ways away, like about 2 miles away. She walked me out, and I kissed her right leaning against my car. And I had a grin from cheek to cheek, you know, it was ear to ear. And she said, "I've never seen anyone smiling like you." I said, "I've never smiled like this before." I was almost crying. You know what, that feeling of just incredible, I mean, it was bliss. It was bliss. I was crying. I was so happy. I mean, it was just unheard of. And I was kissing her goodnight. and her husband drove by in the truck. And I felt, normally I would have been so paranoid and afraid, and I just felt at that moment like it was, I couldn't have cared if he had come and beaten me up, or if he had come and gone crazy, done a loony, shot me, anything. It wouldn't have mattered, you know.
Has there ever been anyone since that got you that way?
Only her when I had an affair with her, later on.
When you look back upon it now,
none were as beautiful, none were as sensitive, none were as intelligent. I promise.
what are your thoughts about her now? She left him and
She left me.
she threw you aside. She got married.
Yeah.
She wrote you that letter.
You know the letter better than I do. I can't remember the letter, man.
I can. She said that. She said she was very fond of you.
I'm very fond of you. I'm very fond of you. Can you imagine me saying to her, I'm very fond of you? I mean,
I wouldn't write anything to her. But you still love her, huh? In spite of the
always
creep
will. Always will, no matter what happens. No matter
In
if
spite
I
of the
fall in
fact
love.
that she went and married Bernie Creep.
That hurts me, you know. Whatever that creep. We won't call him Bernie anything. We'll call him the shoe salesman. I saw him selling books one time, but we'll call him the shoe salesman.
Digression. In spite of the fact that she left you to marry a guy who you think is nowhere, and that she wrote you a letter, which was a Dear David letter, and all that, you still love her?
Always will. Always will.
Do
No
you
matter
think-
how much. No matter how much is not said, or how many times I've fallen in love again, I always will.
Do you think you do?
And the thing I find that hurts me most, and I miss most about it, and the thing I regret so much, I'm not jealous, I never was. The thing that hurts me most is that I can't talk to her, I can't see her.
Still love her?
Yes, and I want to talk with her, I want to see her, I want to, you know, in order for me to be in love with her the way I was, she was my best friend, you know? I mean, like I confided in her as much or more so than I confided in this tape recorder.
Do you think you'll ever be with her again?
No.
Does that rip you apart?
No. It's a reality I've accepted.
And in the end, David Cassidy died as a result of liver disease. Drugs played a relatively small role in his life, but alcohol was something he used to numb himself from his self-described sense of sadness and loneliness. When there was so very little time left, he made a public statement to a producer for the A&E channel in which he said that he lied about his alcoholism and took responsibility for his actions. That was a bold and admirable revelation. We should never criticize David for his addiction. That disease is something that haunts many. After the tears, he should be loved for his talent and for his honesty.
Alcohol.
Ah, yes.
About what? I'm sure every kid, all of us have had drinks when we were kids. But at what time did you started drinking like more than what was just hip and social and pleasant?
I still am a social drinker. I like to have one, tie one on every now and then. I like to have a couple here and there. I never.
But when did it begin? I mean, when?
About I suppose 2 or 3 years ago. I started drinking instead of like smoking. I suppose I substituted one for the other because I found when I started going to parties and started having to do like at the bistro with the ABC people, or with the Canadian network people.
Couldn't take a popper out.
You couldn't do any of that stuff. It was also so difficult to maintain. It became more and more difficult for me to maintain and to concentrate when I used to get high. I just used to become like a veggie, which I later became also.
It was about, you were around 21.
21, 22.
What was your drink? Beer?
Well, I started drinking beer because I could drink a lot of it, you see.
What's a lot to you?
Well, 3 or 4 bottles, 3 or 4 cans, sometimes a 6-pack. Depends, that's a lot.
What was your favorite brand?
I don't even know them. I'm not a connoisseur, I just drink them. That's all. I hardly ever ask. I mean, I'll drink anything, just about. Any kind.
When you go into a supermarket, you never ask for a specific brand.
Sometimes I ask for Heinekens. I like that. I think it's only because I used to see them around my old man's house all the time, and they used to look good. He told me it was the best beer that you could buy in a bottle. I think when I was about 12. You see, I come from a long line of Irish drinkers. Mm-hmm. My grandfather was a real good drinker. Probably one would call him an alcoholic.
What was his name?
William Cassidy.
Almost sounds like there should be an O in the middle of that.
My uncle, my father's brother, is a reformed alcoholic and is part of AA.
What's his name?
Joe. I just saw him for the first time. He's a wonderful man. I had a little reunion with him. First time I'd seen him in years. Wonderful man.
Name some of the other drinkers in the family.
They were all drinkers. All good drinkers in my family. Long line of pubs and wakes, and my grandfather was an engineer on the railroad, and he in turn, his son Joe, works with the Long Island Railroad, and his son Joe, who's my cousin, is also on the railroad. So it's about 4 generations of railroad people, and I mean these are real blue-collar, honest, humorous, Catholic, Irish, New York, fun-loving folk.
Including Dad.
Dad is right in there with him. My father can drink with the best of them. He used to take me out with him when I'd see him occasionally in the early teens. I remember he used to take me to places in New York with him when I'd have my one chance to wear the suit he bought me from the year before, with my white socks and my tennis shoes. And we used to go to places like Danny's Hideaway, and I'd see him put 13, 15 scotch and sodas down and be straight.
Did you envy that at the time? Did you respect it, or did it?
Yeah, I mean, of course I did. It was like looking up, it was like my dad, Look at my dad. And he always kept his cool, I mean, my father's crazy, He's really a unique person. But he, if he's in a real good frame of mind when he has a couple of drinks, if he's in a real good frame of mind before he has a couple of drinks, He's enchanting. He's wonderful. I mean, he sits there and he has me belly laughing for hours. Nobody gets me to laugh like he does, you know? I mean, it's like sitting in with an evening, having Don Rickles entertain you all evening, only funnier.
We're going to talk about him in detail and your family, but right now I want to talk about him in conjunction with the
Drinking. He's a good drinker. He's a real good drinker.
What about...
One might call him an alcoholic.
Do you?
Because he drinks all the time. I would say that he's a marginal alcoholic. I would say that anyone, it depends upon what your description of an alcoholic is.
Does he drink every day?
Yes, he drinks every day.
Does he get high every day, stoned every day?
I don't know. I'm not with him enough to tell you that. But I know from being around him from a limited extent to a limited extent that he drinks every day. And my brother has told me he drinks every day, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's... I think he has a slight drinking problem.
Do you?
Have a slight drinking problem? Yeah, I think I have a slight drinking. Nah, I don't even know if it's a problem. I'm not obsessed with it. It doesn't hang me up. I like to have a couple every now and then. I like to go out and get drunk every now and then.
About how often?
Once or twice a week.
We talked about some of the classic experiences, classic dope recollections. Do you have any classic alcohol recollections? Beer, wine, brandy, anything that comes to mind?
Oh, there's so many countless alcohol experiences, you know?
Alcohol being probably your most popular or favorite of all of them. So probably you have more alcohol stories.
Yeah, the reason being is because it affects me least. The after effect is least painful of all drugs I ever took. Perhaps excepting marijuana. And I feel better when I'm drunk than I do when I'm stoned or when I'm anything else. Basically I'm just really, I suppose, an extrovert. And I get caught up and hung up in a lot of the trips in my daily routine, and sometimes it bums me out. So consequently, to release myself from all of the pressures and whatever it might be, I'll have a couple after work, you know? Or after whatever it is I've gone through, and I feel a lot better. But I would hardly say I have a drinking problem at all now.
Tell me about one of the binges.
Binges.
One of the crazy alcoholic nights.
I can't remember them, you know? I can't remember them.
What do you do when you drink?
I'd wake up, one time I woke up at the corner of White Oak and Encino. I'd been sitting at this stoplight for 2.5 hours sleeping. Cops woke me up.
Again.
Clink, clink, clink on the door. Oh! It was 5 in the morning. And I mean, I was really drunk. And I rolled down the window, and the cop says, can I see your license? And I said, sure. And he said, David Cassidy. I said, yes, that's right, officer. And I said, as a matter of fact, I only live a couple of blocks. And he said, oh, you sure you can make it all right? I said, oh, yes, no problem at all, officer. And I rolled the window up, I think, on his flashlight and took off. I think I probably ran the red, too.
And kept the flashlight.
And got out quick. I said, yeah, I only live a couple of blocks from here. And, I can't even remember them all. When you're drunk, you're practically unconscious.
What do you do mainly when you drink? Do you stay at home and drink with friends? Do you go out?
Occasionally I go out with you, have a couple. Occasionally I go out with a couple of other friends of mine and have a few. I'm not a real big drinker, to be honest with you. Once in a while, once a week, I'll go out and do some serious drinking. Otherwise, I might have a beer with dinner, 1 or 2 after. Sometimes not. depending upon how I feel, you know.
Have you ever been a cigarette smoker?
Yes, I smoked cigarettes for 7 years. From the time I was 13 to the time I was 20. The best thing in the world I ever did for myself was to stop smoking.
Do you think we've fairly covered that whole experience from the dope, alcohol point of view? Are there just
Yeah,
facts?
I hate to play too much importance upon the drinking because it's really...
Without placing value judgments on what we're going to do with the material or what we're not going to do with the material.
Well, I
This is
know what
just
we're
the
going to do,
fact
so I
find.
really can't honestly... I can't...
Well, we don't know what we're going to use. We don't know what we're not going to use. I just want the facts to be in the machine. The facts.
I'd say that they're all there. I don't think I've excluded anything.
I'll accept the facts as they've been presented. But for anybody to suggest that David didn't have a drinking problem, they're in denial as much as David was. David had a very serious drinking problem. This is not something that we should castigate him for, or this is not a subject of humiliation. This is a disease. He suffered from it. David and I drank together, and he would have 1 or 2 or 3 glasses, and he'd be charming and pleasant. But it would never stop at that, at least not around me. There'd be 4th, 5th, and 6th, and there would be times when I could see that he was really in deep trouble. The most well-meaning of friends and family can do and say whatever they wish to say, but it's been my experience that when somebody is suffering from one of these dependency issues, they need to get help from professionals, from people who really know what they're saying and doing. And even among the professionals, and I know people who are super professional. I'm a close friend of the lady who is the director of the Betty Ford Foundation. We go out for dinner with her husband frequently. And if you talk to the people in AA and Betty Ford and all these other groups, you know, if there's a 50% recovery rate, that's cause for celebration. And no matter how recovered anybody is, they're one sip away from going back to the starting point. We don't know enough about these dependencies and enough about these diseases. David drank too much. He couldn't help himself.
Can we listen to another one of his interview excerpts?
Please, yes.
Let's do the third one, David.
So there came a time when David played Madison Square Garden in New York City. He was at the top of his game. This was a testament to his talent and popularity and endurance. Every entertainer dreams of playing the Garden. So I wanted David to walk us through it from his point of view, with as much detail he could recall. During these recollections, he also spoke of the man he respected the most.
The week now prior to the Garden, you regard perhaps as like the lowest moment in your life.
Emotionally, the lowest moment of my life.
Were you working the TV show at this time?
Yes, of course.
During
the week.
How were you getting through it? I mean, collapsing inside?
Terrible. Yeah. Terrible. I mean, I was just...
Were you a recluse on the stage?
Yes, I always was.
Wouldn't talk to anyone?
No, I was, I went through periods of when I was in a good mood or something, I was really flamboyant and always was really there were always visitors on the set. It used to drive me crazy. Always on the day, there were always kids and things. And after a while, I couldn't leave the set, because when I'd walk off to my chair, I'd be surrounded by people. I couldn't think about what I was doing. There, signing autographs, taking pictures, meeting people. It became a real harassment. I had to stop them from bringing visitors on every day, because it was, everybody wanted to visit, you know, watch it in action. That was really a problem. I used to have to go out the back door to get to my dressing room, and they'd wait around the dressing room, and it's creepy. It was terrible.
This period, this week, was this the Valium beer week?
That's when it started. Valiums, you know. That's also the beginning of the, I think, breakdown. I suffered sort of a nervous breakdown, I think.
This is where the breakdown was beginning.
People would see me for a matter of a minute, and they'd look, I mean, I know this to be true. Later, my friends of mine would tell me, like, people would come over and visit, and they'd see me for about a minute, and they'd look at Sam after I'd leave, and they'd go, "What happened to him? What's the matter with him?"
People say you aged a lot.
Yes, I
around that
did.
period of time.
I did.
Just got old.
Yeah, I did. A lot of, it's look at the President of the United States. Look at Richard Nixon before he became president, and look at a picture after. See what that man aged in 4 years, or 8 years, or 6 years. It's phenomenal. It's the same thing. It's tension, pressure, anxiety. No thanks.
What about excitement about going to the garden?
All of it. It wasn't even, I mean, I'd done so many concerts by then. It was only exciting right before, the hour before I did it. That's the only time I could ever forget. The highest moment I spent was thinking about knowing that my grandfather was going to be in the audience and was going to witness it. He was about 81, I guess, at the time. He was essentially like my father, you know.
Let's go into the chronology. You now you finished the Partridge on Friday?
Yeah, flew Thursday.
Thursday. Did you see the psychiatrist that Friday?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, I think I flew, no, I think, I can't remember.
You flew into New York Friday night?
Did this concert on Saturday night.
Friday night, you flew into New York.
Right.
I
arrived at New York on Saturday morning, went to sleep, took the red eye, went to sleep, had a rehearsal in the afternoon.
Where did you stay that night? Plaza?
I think I played an afternoon date on Saturday afternoon at the Garden. I think it was 4 o'clock or something like that. They wanted me to do 2 shows, and I would have done it, except I was just at a low.
Jumping ahead again, you arrived in New York Saturday on the Red Eye Express around 5 o'clock in the morning.
6 or so, and I played it like that.
Did you go directly to the hotel?
Yeah.
Was that the Plaza Hotel?
Yeah, I think it was.
Okay. Now there was a point here, wasn't there, that you went to visit your grandfather?
I was always visiting my grandfather.
But I mean, at this point here, you're now in the hotel, and it's Saturday afternoon. Were you to go to...
No, I talked with him. It's difficult for me to remember because I played back there so many times. He saw me twice, I think. Once at the Garden State Arts Center and once at the Madison Square Garden.
But on this particular occasion, then, you stayed in New York.
Yeah, I was too wiped out. I couldn't. Okay. Most of the time I would go, and I stayed there, and I think I have my recollection of it. I mean, the thing that motivated me was always what I was going to bring to him, what it was going to do for him to see me.
Why him? More than Dad or Mom?
To this day, I respected him more than any other man that I've ever known. I think that if I succeed at being half the man that he was, and could be half as good as he was in my lifetime, I will have succeeded, in life. I think he was of a cut, a fabric that is no longer. He was American. He was He was born in 1889. He saw the turn of the century, you know, and he worked for the public service all his life. And he...
Doing what?
Reading meters. And he supported everybody in my family during the Depression, unlike nothing. And he was just the finest man I ever knew. You know, just the finest man I ever knew. I don't know. He really loved me a lot too, you know. I lived with him for the better part of my first 10 years. And he had a lot to do with... Most of the good in me, I think, comes from him. That's taking a lot away from my mother and my grandmother and my father and everybody else. I believe most of the concrete things and things that really got me through the lows in my life, I think he established for me and helped me establish as a little kid.
Any specifics that you...
He was a religious man, you know, and
What religion?
read the Bible every day. He was a Protestant, Methodist. He had me going to church, not his, incidentally, another church, an Episcopal church. But he really wanted me to do that, which was all right.
Did he approve of showbiz? No.
Anything I wanted to do was all right. He's a big sports enthusiast as well. And we used to he used to come and watch me when I played in Little League.
Uh-huh.
It was always, I just saw the pride he took in me, you know, when I would do something. And the idea of me succeeding in anything and being good at whatever it was, he loved. And he took so much pride in the fact that I was his grandson, you know. I was like a hometown hero. I come from a very small town in New Jersey, a very lower middle-class neighborhood. Middle class at best. You know, very small homes. I guess it would be considered middle class. White Protestant neighborhood.
For him, it must have been a big thing, you coming to the
Enormous thing.
He was an older man.
The biggest thing in his life. 81.
81.
Yeah, the biggest thing in his life, I'm sure.
So you did probably call him from the hotel when you came in.
I'm sure I did.
And he must have been excited.
Yeah. He was a very unemotional person, on the outside. Only glimpses of it if you really knew him. He didn't talk, didn't mince any words, you know. He spoke. He was virtually uneducated, and he's self-educated, really. He read the Bible every day, read the dictionary, read books. And it was a quiet, simple, very good human being. He would give you the shirt off of his back. I can remember, and it's no poverty trip, it was just I can remember not having any money, and my mother was broke, and he took us in, you know. And I can remember I asked him one time, I can remember really wanting a nickel. Really wanting a nickel so I could go down to watch the baseball game at night and buy a couple of pieces of candy. I can recall that being one of the most important things in my life at the time. I think I was about 8, 7. And I asked him for a nickel. He laid $50 on me.
Yeah.
And it was like,
yeah,
God, you know?
He's gone now, isn't he?
Yes, he died earlier this year.
You went back for his...
Yeah, sure. Yeah. He lived a good life, though.
He died seeing his grandson having...
Made it. That's what really pleases me most, that he got to experience it. Because it really brought a lot to his life, you know. For elderly people, it's really sad in this country. He never lived in a home, which I was really pleased about. He never really experienced much senility, although I don't know if that's so bad, because it's mostly just bliss, I would imagine, after that.
Childlike.
Yeah, they become very childlike. It's terrible, though, you know, they become outcasts of society.
A limo has just pulled up in front of the Plaza Hotel.
Well, 12 limos. 11 decoys and one the real thing. I think I pulled out in a Toyota. There were
About how many guys did you have with you then for that day?
about 20 probably.
20.
It got larger as
What was the
we
name of
went
that
on.
big? Was the big black dude with you then?
Yeah.
What was his name?
I can't remember.
He was your personal.
Yeah. BG.
So you had like about a
He
dozen.
worked for Jagger, I
Yes.
recall.
Yes, he did. So there were about a dozen limos. They pulled up in front of the plaza. The plan was to get you out to the kitchen, I suppose.
Yeah. Or I guess it was the plaza. I can't even remember where it was. You'll have to ask Ruth. She'll
Into the Toyota.
Into the Toyota, into the garden, early, real early, like 3 hours before.
What time was the show to begin?
4 o'clock.
So you got there at around 12 or 1 o'clock.
Yeah, the psychology was New York City at night for kids is nowhere.
Right.
So let's have it in the afternoon. It's indoors, doesn't matter. That building was rocking. It was shaking. There was such intensity in it.
When you arrived at 1 o'clock, give me your first feelings now upon getting into the building.
I can remember seeing a rodeo and a circus in the Madison Square Garden when I was a kid. The old Madison Square Garden, but still was the same thing to me. It was like, Madison Square Garden is like the most prestigious place perhaps to play in the country because it is 21,000 seats. But because it's New York City, where the audience is perhaps at the best in the world, and it's at the focal point of it all, you know. You get more press from playing New York City, 21,000, than I got playing at 80,000 in Milwaukee, you know. So it's just a real important date. More important than LA.
When you walked in, you thought of the rodeo.
I remember thinking about the circus, having those little pen lights and shaking, turning, twirling my pen light as the whole place was real dark. You know, I used to buy those things, and I can remember seeing all the cigarettes light up when it's real dark at the circus and the rodeo. I can remember I sat in front of Pat Boone one time at the rodeo. And I remember he had no idea who I was, and Shirley, I think, had just done a movie with him. I met Pat Boone later.
Backstage.
Rolling Stone called it Cassidy's Satellite. There were satellite? Constellation. That was the word. Satellite. Ruth Aarons, my mother, Sam, Steve Ross, Wes Farrell, the head of Screen Gems.
What's his name?
John Mitchell. All people that were instrumental in...
Who else?
That's all I can remember that were backstage.
And the band.
Yeah, they were in another dressing room always.
What about your grandfather?
My grandfather. But he always sat down. He never was up rock and rolling with everybody.
Were you scared?
I was excited. I can remember feeling the intensity of that building. It was so intense in that building. When I came up on stage,
The bands, the people, they started letting in, I guess, at around 3 o'clock, 3:30.
3.
Must have been
They
quiet.
had closed circuit television. I saw the audience before I went out to it.
There was a monitor in the dressing room.
Yeah.
You saw the audience coming in.
Mm-hmm.
What did they look like? Usual?
Big. They looked
Besides
big.
numbers, I mean, the usual age.
Yeah. A little more sophisticated. Easy age.
Anything?
There's a thing in the New York Times the next day. Big spread that said, "They all love Uncle Wiggily."
Any particular thoughts go through your mind at that time?
Just I hope it's a good one. I hope it's a good one. It was a good one, I suppose.
The band started playing. They did their set, 45 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And were all the others still in the dressing room with you now?
Yeah, I sort of got them all out.
All out?
Yeah.
Were you fairly much alone?
About 5 minutes before. I can recall I was just hoping that it was going to be real good for my grandfather. Hoping that he didn't get crushed or anything, you know.
Did you know where he was seated and all of that?
I just had one of my guys look after him, and look over, make sure that no one harassed my mother or him. You know. When the lights went down, they brought my mom and he out because they instantly recognized them both, you know.
5 minutes, there was this period of time, I assume you were just dressing and fixing yourself up?
Yeah, putting on this suit.
When you were alone?
Mm-hmm.
The band stopped, there was an intermission. Do you remember if there was an announcer that day?
Yeah, the announcer was, who's the ABC disc jockey?
Wink Martindale?
No, the ABC in New York, WABC. Who's the guy?
Cousin Brucey?
That's it.
Bruce Morrow?
Bruce Morrow.
Do you remember anything of the intro?
Oh, I think it's just, you know, it was just...
the standard?
I think they announced me as the greatest star in the world or something. I don't know. One of those biggies, real biggies. You know?
And you came out?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Now, any way you can you just tell us what that experience singing there was like?
I can't. I can only...
Gonna have to try.
Yeah, all the other moments, when there were some real high ones, the first time I walked out was certainly almost as high, not quite as high, because my grandfather wasn't there, you know. And there were a number of other things. I came back after I was 18, I came back to New York, and I worked in a textile industry in the mailroom, clearing $38.80 a week. I was making 50 grand in an afternoon. It was a biggie, you know. I felt like I had taken it and I had it was like stoning Goliath, you know. I felt like I had taken my little slingshot and I had defeated the monster, you know. Felt like I had risen above the occasion, and I won. I was the winner. New York has a lot of my youth, you know, memories of my youth, and my father and the Broadway stage, and my mother and Broadway, and there are a lot of things about New York that meant something to me, you know, nostalgic reasons. So when I came out, it was like ecstasy in a way. I forgot all about everything else in my life and just got real high at the energy that was in the building, because it was phenomenal. And I think I got him pretty high, you know. I played a lot of the songs and sang a lot of them, and I can recall feeling so emotionally touched I was dedicating songs to people I didn't even know, I hardly knew. And this one's for John Mitchell's cousin. You know, I mean, I can recall just dedicating songs to people I didn't even hardly know. You know? It was silly, sort of. And this one's for my dog, you know. This one's for my dead dog.
Was it a good show?
They loved it. So it was a good show.
For you?
There were never really any good shows. I always compromised, you know. It was all sort of knowing that you were doing something. You were trying to make Drek sound good. You were trying to... There's nothing else you can do. If you're singing Chewy Chewy, there's nothing else other than Chewy Chewy other than make it good Chewy Chewy.
And then it was over, and you don't stick around for an encore.
No, I didn't then.
And then you told me that great story about where they took you and how.
They took me to this fucking
How
dump
did you get
in
out of the
Queens.
building, first of all?
They destroyed 4 limousines.
The kids did.
Yeah. I was out before they realized I was out.
You
But I got
usually
out
before
I
the
got out in the
applause is
Toyota,
over.
I remember. In the back seat with a blanket. In the trunk, I think, with a blanket.
In the trunk.
I think in the trunk. And yeah, in the trunk. And then they let me out about 4 blocks away.
You
I got out and got in the back seat.
Who was it? Who else was in the car? The big black dude?
Yeah, and I didn't see anybody for hours. They took me to this dump in Queens because the hotel was, kids and I mean this sleazo creep place. Like pictures were falling off the wall, the rugs stunk. It was just a horrible place. Queens. I mean, it took me 20 minutes to get there, a half an hour to get there. I'm dried, sweat, creep, dumb outfit, It's too short. Pants were up to here. It was ridiculous, I remember lying in the tub. I was just to take a bath afterward, just to cool out, relax, wash off. Showers were just too exhausting.
You had to stand.
Pardon me?
You have to stand in the shower.
Yeah, you have to lie down and relax. I used to drink, have a beer or water or something. I used to drink exuberant amount of water, just water, water, water. And then afterwards I might have a beer or something.
You were lying in this tub.
Yeah. And I realized that it was over. I realized that I had done it. I think everything else from there on was kind of anticlimactic. Even though I did bigger dates, I think reached higher points, or equally as high, certainly. A lot of other times. But I think I realized then that I had done it as good as I could do it, within the framework that I was in. I had done it all, I played the biggest, most prestigious. I don't know. I wowed them as much as they could be wowed.
Spend the night in that. Was it a hotel or an apartment?
It was a hotel. No, I got out of there. I
got into the bathtub.
Yeah, I went crazy there. I started, throwing the pictures off the wall, I think. I just started, freaking. I was alone the bodyguard was outside. I was alone in this room. This creep, stinking room. And I had a pair of jeans, I think, and a shirt, and I finally started making frantic phone calls, and everybody was caught up at the hotel and the limousines, and, they had to get cabs because they started tearing apart limousines. And they literally did thousands of dollars of damage to the cars, I think, afterwards. And then I just read reviews about it. None of them really put me down.
Yeah, just a minute. You left the place.
The hotel.
And where did you go?
I think I went back and had dinner with that girl that we met. And I did an interview, I think, with Robin Green, who did the Rolling Stone. And
that night you went back to whatever hotel you had stayed in?
Yeah. I can't remember what hotel. But I stayed in that hotel, and I remember she was going to come along with me.
Culver City?
No. This girl I met in New York.
Rolling Stone girl.
No. This girl I met in New York that I told you about, that I ended up sort of having, she became sort of like my girlfriend.
Right.
My temporary replacement.
When did you talk to your grandfather?
The next day.
What did he say?
He just said you did real good, I think. I just recall him
He never said much. He didn't mince words. I knew, I knew. He didn't have to say. He said it was real fine, son. Something like that. Real fatherly.
And then you went back to LA and got back in the grind again.
Next day I went to Bangor, Maine. It was freezing cold in the snow. Wowed him up there. Remember, they picked me up at the airport at Bangor, Maine, with these two birds in the car, in bikinis, and lollipops all over the place, and music, and I think I was drinking B&B or something, brandy of some sort, in the car, going to the hotel. Show, I think, was later on in the afternoon. And I took a shower in a sauna. I think I took a sauna. They had one of those portable saunas. And it was great. It was real great. Anticlimactic a bit, but still good. Then I went back to wherever it was. LA.
Wow.
Can I ask you, when you hear this now, can you picture him?
Yeah, that last excerpt you just played, I had no recollection of us taping it. That's like hearing it for the first time for me. And that's really tragic. I mean, what we just heard him say, this was just prior to him playing Madison Square Garden. Huge experience. And he was talking about a collapse, a nervous breakdown. He just said that he was feeling ugly on the inside, so he thought he might be looking ugly on the outside. I'm hearing his inner torment at the moment of one of his greatest achievements in terms of his career to date, and that it afforded him no joy, no expectation of celebration, almost as if he felt he was either unworthy of the attention and the accolades, or that it was all for the wrong reasons. But that excerpt suggests to me a deeply tormented David. Hurts to listen to that one.
Why so much more than the others?
The others are more explainable. It's a process of deduction and naivete about how magazines are going to write about you, the nature of celebrity. This one hits closest to home for me. I mean, there was sometimes when we had conversations, not on tape, where I would respond to things he said, and we would have discussions about them. With this one, which I can't remember, I wouldn't know what to say. I would just feel... I mean, I think that this excerpt is the true essence of the Cassidy experience. He had it all, and he felt nothing. Numb. A distraction to the essence of his life. A sense of worthlessness. His words. He felt ugly.
How common is this, in your view, among people who achieve this level of fame?
That one's fairly rare. I mean, I've heard clients of mine say that it wasn't their best show, or they didn't have the best expectations, or they didn't feel that they were up for it, that kind of thing. But that was almost the voice of doom. He was setting himself up
for abject failure. Now, I do remember the back end to that story. The back end to that story was he told me after he played Madison Square Garden and after they took him out of the stadium, I think they threw him in the back of a car for security purposes and drove him 15 miles away to some hotel or apartment in Queens where he could take a shower and change and there'd be no fan presence, and slowly he would be able to integrate his way back into the city without 20,000 screaming girls following him. And when he was in this place, the thing that impacted him the most was that he was alone. And that during these moments, especially the moments of these tapes, when these tapes were recorded, he was alone. He was a solitary figure. That even during the successes, he had nobody to share them with. In that sense, there was look, the David Cassidy that I knew in those years was more lonely than fulfilled.
Come on, rock it, rock it, rock it.
Okay, fellas. Right, hold tight on the back there. Just turn your front forward when you're out. Get the towel around your neck, man. Hold the towel. You okay? You all right? Right, Sam.
Oh, Jesus.
Hold on to the back there. Here we go.
Now you guys be careful.
Yeah. Hold tight, everybody, because when we go through, there's going to be loads of noise.
How do you feel now it's over, David?
Right, hold tight, everyone.
Oh, I'm wasted.
Right. Okay, hold tight, everybody.
Do you think it's worth it?
Oh, it's worth it. It's just, you can't compare the high to anything else, you know? Nothing else gets you there like going up there and feeling that intensity, all that energy.
Hold tight, man, hold tight.
Does this kind of thing frighten you? Does it frighten you?
No, I'm not frightened. It's anticipation, you know? I'm not really frightened, though.
Okay.
You get sort of, becomes sort of like, you get kind of used to it, you know?
You're nearly away.
Without trying to be blasé, you know, it's like an occupational hazard.
You'd miss it if they didn't do it, would you?
Well, I suppose I probably would, yeah, you know? When you become accustomed to something, and then when it's not there, you think, you know, what am I doing wrong? But imagine, I guess, you know, is it my suit? What is it? I don't know. It's beautiful while it lasts, you know?
How do you feel physically now?
Well, other than the fact that I have almost no voice left, you know? And my legs and my body's really, really sore, you know? I've just done too many shows in just a short a period.